This guy was sent to another world, but instead of becoming just a simple player, he ended up as the game master of that realm. His mission? To rebuild a world that had been devastated by a nuclear war. The radiation mutated animals into deadly creatures, turning the outside into a savage wasteland where even a crow could be lethal. And the few human survivors? They're anything but friendly. To complete his task, he has to lure players from Earth into what they believe is an extremely realistic game. But in reality, they're entering another world completely unaware of the truth. The catch? Even with his game master status, he isn't omnipotent. Rebuilding a world from scratch means starting small, beginning with the base where players spawn. From electricity to toilets, everything needs to be constructed, but he can only allow a limited number of players into his world at a time, so he selectively accepts people with specific skills. As the game master, he controls quests and missions, guiding the player's actions, but not entirely, since every player has free will. And that's the story of how one boy rebuilt an entire empire from scratch, all thanks to his game master system. A girl calls out to a young boy in bed and approaches, telling him to stop pretending he's asleep. The boy is there, all happy and blushing, as she calls him for some fun. However, in reality, it feels more like he's lying in a desert with a creature's tongue on his face. He opens his eyes, all happy, but then his expression changes. He's startled. A two-headed hyena was coming straight at him to take a bite. He grabs a rock beside him, throws it at its face, and runs away. As he does, he introduces himself. His name is Chu Guang, a survivor of this desolate place. In the middle of this wild land, he was searching for supplies and food. Little did he know that he'd become so exhausted from going alone, fall into a nap, and end up encountering these beasts. He seems to have escaped, thinking he got lucky facing a monster that wasn't too strong. He looks back and sees the city completely destroyed. He remembers that walking in a place like this at night is extremely dangerous, so even if he has to go hungry, today he had to return to base. In front of an abandoned hospital, entrance 404 was where he called his base. The door had the same number, and he says not to be fooled by the rundown exterior, because inside it's pretty incredible. Man, this guy has one hell of a setup in there. Just then, a little wheeled creature approaches and welcomes him back, saying that the Great Master has returned once again. This was Sev Assistant Code 777. Chu Guang tells the little bot to calm down, saying he was only gone for half a day. But Sev keeps insisting that he has several missions to complete. The robot is the base assistant and Chu Guang is the GM, the famous game master. Having a place like this as a refuge allows him to live peacefully in this isolated world. Just the fact that he has food to keep from starving, though obviously not the best quality, is a big deal. However, the master of this game does not come without responsibilities. He has to coordinate a group of beings known as players who come from Blue Earth through the internet, bringing them to this desolate land to build their lives here. A rather fitting mission for him, considering he also arrived from there 5 months ago. The story then asks if you would believe a game could be as real as the world itself. In the dog's WhatsApp group, people are talking about it. Some seem to believe it, while others are highly skeptical. But if such a thing existed, they'd pay a lot for it. In a male dormitory, a blonde guy says that Chu Guang is seriously delusional. If such an advanced technology existed, it would be used by the military first. He then starts spamming the chat, telling Chu Guang to stop dreaming or stop lying. But he's surprised when Chu Guang claims it does exist and asks if he's willing to try, sending him a link to the desolate world. Back at base 404, Chu Guang sends the link through a voice command, saying that if anyone is interested, all they have to do is click. As you can see, Chu Guang's job is to lure people in and make them click the link and get them trapped in another world. And he's confident that with the number of people he's brought in, it's already enough to complete the mission he has. For bringing in a few more people, he earns a nanocarbon vest and 5 additional points. But the truth is, 5 months ago, he was just working an ordinary sales job. On the day he made an excellent sale and earned a great commission, everyone had a celebratory feast. However, that night, he felt a strange tightness in his chest. A sharp sound cut through his ear, and in the next second, he was losing consciousness. The moment he opened his eyes, he found himself in this strange, desolate world. At first, he thought he had been thrown into some kind of reality show or something, so he started running like a madman, searching for an exit. However, strangely, this place was much larger than he had imagined. The weirdest thing was that he had become a completely different person, from head to toe. Shortly after, he heard that same sharp sound again, but one that had brought him here. And then the most improbable thing, though to us quite predictable, happened. A cistern window popped up right in front of him, welcoming the new collector, Chu Guang. He immediately tried to grab his phone to call the police, but of course he didn't even have one anymore. After a whole day of walking around that place, he started to get hungry. And to survive, he had no choice but to accept the reality that he had ended up in another world. Unexpectedly, after wandering for a while, he found a place with some people. He approached, seeing the group with their backs turned, and figured that maybe he could find food there. Slowly, he tried to sneak into the area. But suddenly, someone pointed a reincarnator at him, warning him not to move or things would get ugly real fast. Chu Guang immediately noticed that the guy was speaking a language he had never heard before. Yet, at the same time, he could understand everything. Old Walter told him not to take another step or things would get complicated. A bit shaken, Chu Guang asked him to calm down, saying he was just looking for directions. But then a shot was fired, not at him, but to kill a creature that was right in front of both of them. The old man then walked away, telling the boy that he shouldn't be wandering around in a place like this without a weapon. He walked up to the monster and warned that if he wasn't careful, he'd end up as food for those beasts. Chu Guang, feeling a bit awkward, thanked him. And to this day, what that guy said remains true. In this world, you need information and resources, and that's exactly what he sought out over the next 5 months. This was a kind of parallel world, one that had been decimated by a war among humanity itself. The entire world had been wiped out, and the toxicity in the air created mutated animals. Obviously, they weren't the only threat. Countless assassins and bandits roamed this land as well. After some time here, Chu Guang learned quite a few things. However, he kept hearing that same sharp sound ringing in his ear, until one day as he was walking through the city, he approached an abandoned sanatorium. The closer he got to it, the louder the sound became. He stepped inside, making his way through, until deep within, he saw a strange door. He followed the corridor, noticing that the noise was growing louder and louder. That's when he found the door to base 404, and he was certain the sound was coming from behind it. Somehow, he felt as if something was calling to him from beyond that door, and without even thinking, his hand moved on its own toward the button. The moment he pressed it, the door opened, smoke poured out, and he was engulfed by shadows. Of course, it was just Sev, who immediately approached, welcomed him, and announced that he was now the GM of this place. Before Chu Guang could even process anything, his profession had already changed, and he had officially become a level 0 game master. Sev then explained that he was there to assist him with the work he would have to do. Through the internet, you would have to lure in creatures known as players, bring them into this world, and help them build bases and homes. By doing so, the world would become repopulated, and he would earn more points and grow stronger. Chu Guang was excited. At the very least, it seemed he could still communicate with Earth from here. The robot confirmed that was correct, as they even had an official page that allowed direct contact with Earth. The players assigned to this place would be given a number and would be registered under his profile. He could also hand out lower numbers to people who wanted to join the beta test. The game would then be delivered to their headset in a unique way. A girl is submerged when she suddenly wakes up inside a liquid, and the robot explains that when this happens, they become a clone of this place. Chu Guang smiles, saying that it looks like he's been granted a second life from the heavens. Our guy then decides he'll just call the little robot Sev. Apparently, it hadn't been named at this point. Sev starts spinning around happily, and Chu Guang wonders why it acts like a child. Even though the assistant is a bit childish, the system itself seems absurdly powerful. After all, he is the game master. His first mission was to get 4 people to register in the game. Back in that same dormitory, the blonde guy is still arguing about how a game this realistic can't exist. He thinks it's ridiculous for people to be talking about a 100% immersive experience, because that's simply impossible. Meanwhile, Chu Guang is doing everything he can to convince the guy to give it a shot. That's when he sends the link and tells the guy to try it. The blonde guy is confused. He was just about to install some mods he made for another game. Apparently, he has a mod where you get 100 women, and he's already super happy just imagining them saying how amazing it'll be. He then says he's eager to test this thing out as a student in the field of technology, hoping to see the future of humanity. With that, he clicks the button. But suddenly, something blue appears around him. A helmet materializes out of nowhere, encasing his head and slamming him onto the ground. Man, this thing is way more forceful than I expected. But instead of being scared, the lunatic is absolutely thrilled, saying he's excited for this realistic immersion. As the blonde guy, Yi Wei, enters the game, our guy introduces himself and explains that he's here to restore civilization. But Yi Wei is far more excited to explore other aspects of the game, until he suddenly comes across a notification saying there are still 72 hours left before the game begins. The idiot slaps his forehead, saying he already lowered his pants, and now he has to stay like this for 3 days. His dorm mates are already saying they're going to barge into his room and beat him up. Meanwhile, Chu Guang is watching a chat that's exclusively for beta players on the server. Everyone's talking about the weird headset they suddenly receive and trying to figure out where it came from. Chu Guang just pretends there's some massive company, and that this is a top-secret technology. Only 4 people had received this unique headset, so they better not lose it. The helmet would be used to collect data, identify the user, register their account, and create their clone. The players then start questioning how something this good could be free and ask if they have to pay. As soon as our guy reveals that it's free, for now, they all start celebrating, dancing, and even confessing their joy. Chu Guang is happy that he managed to bring in some of the people he used to game with. At the same time, he tells himself that he has no idea what happened to his family. Since he disappeared, everyone must have deleted his contact and forgotten about him. He then tells Sev that he wants to make some changes to the game's main screen. He knows that to rebuild a city in the beginning, physical strength will be essential. And that's why they need a cover image that will bait the poor fools in. Maybe even some AI with conversational abilities to pretend to be a girl and ask for help in the game. Just imagining Yi Wei, for example, falling head over heels and saying he'll log in right away to help the beautiful girl. Sev then says that all of this is easy to do, but he's curious why our guy only accepted 4 players out of the 11. At the moment, they have over 100 starter capsules, so he could have way more people. Shubong explains that resources are still too scarce to support a large population. He does have 3 commands to remove players who start going against his plans, but what he needs are people willing to play, not a bunch of rebels. Being too hasty would only lead to mistakes, so for now, he's focusing on just these 4. Sev then says that makes sense, especially since these 4 complete his first mission. He clicks on the item and the nano-protection vest appears on his body. The vest could absorb the kinetic energy from incoming damage and distribute it into durability. Sev also mentions that he can get some interesting stuff from the mystery boxes of 1, 10, and 100 points. The 1-point box gives food, the 10-point box gives medicine, and the 100-point box usually contains a weapon. He earned 5 points from his first mission, and now he's unsure whether to spend them on food or save up for a weapon. Sev tells him to check out the new mission before deciding. The mission states that the players are arriving, but he needs to set up a generator capable of producing at least 10 kilowatts. Additionally, he'll receive a substance extractor, and Sev warns that this is really important. Seeing that he's about to earn 100 points, he tells Sev to open 5 boxes for food at least. A door opens, and smoke begins to rise. Disappointed, he asks if this is seriously all the mystery boxes have to offer. The poor guy needs to eat in this apocalypse, and all he got was a bunch of lollipops and candy. Well, as he's complaining, he notices a piece of paper among the junk and picks it up to read. The message states that creatures in this world are easier to make use of than players. Something about them being curious and extremely useful. At the end of the message, it says this was left behind by the first great master of this base. But Chu Guang is annoyed. Instead of getting another piece of candy, he got this useless message that doesn't help at all. At the same time, though, he realizes that the person who left the message also created the helmet and this entire game, which really is a genius idea. He then asks Sev if he knows anything about the so-called first great master. Sev replies that he was only activated when our guys stepped inside. Chu Guang understands but figures there must be some records in the database. The attack from both factions was successful, leading humanity to total extinction. The robot adds that after that, a harsh winter began as well. But it seems like all records related to that guy have been deleted. He decides to store the message away and focus on his mission. He informs the robot that he's heading out and will be back in at most 3 days. To help the players when they arrive, he first plans to take a trip to the survivor camp. At 8 in the morning, he spots 2-headed hyenas roaming the streets, knowing there'll be a massive challenge for the new players. The problem is that, at that moment, they turn and seem to notice him. It looks like these creatures develop those weird things on their faces, due to mutations from gamma-ray exposure. He smirks and picks up a steel rod from the ground, figuring that with this and the vest, he might just be able to handle them. But apparently, they hadn't actually noticed him. They turn away and continue on their path, which is good because for now, he wants to avoid being discovered. After all, he knows that the real threats in this place are the mutants. The Creeper, for example, is a bioweapon that crawls and was designed specifically to kill people. The hyenas are incredibly smart too, always sending some ahead to scout out their targets, just like the mutated cockroaches in this place. When one of them spots you, you're quickly surrounded and dragged off. Man, I do not want to die at the hands of a giant cockroach. That's terrifying. Sometime later, he arrives at Burt Street, where the survivor camp is located. First, he wants to buy some chips and stock up on supplies. Otherwise, things will get difficult once the place is flooded with players. Chips are basically the currency in this place. He places some items on the scale to trade for coins, but of course, the scale always claims the items weigh less than they actually do. The old man hands over 3 tokens. I thought they were chips, but it turns out it's just a translation thing. And he makes up an excuse, telling our guy that his items are barely worth anything. Guang then asks for some weapons, but the old man says he's certain he can't afford them. Besides, he recommends that the boy buy gasoline instead, since winter is coming. Guang had no idea about this, and the old man says it's because he's only been here for 5 months. The winter might come even earlier this year, and snowfall is expected to begin in October. Because of this, creatures start hunting even more aggressively to stockpile food. And the real issue is that when walking in winter, you never know what's hiding beneath the snow. On top of that, trade caravans will stop operating. The only option will be to travel from Burt Street to Stone Tower, but that's a 6-mile journey. Guang recently learned that old Charlie was once a survivor, but he was captured and enslaved. As a result, he was sold at an auction and bought by the owner of Burt Street. Since then, he has been handling trades and negotiations with other survivors. But he was a smart guy back in his world, he probably would have become an engineer or a doctor. Our guy thanks him for the advice and says he's heading out. He then walks through the city and arrives home, knowing that 3 tokens are far from enough for what he needs. He opens a box where he's been storing them and finds that he now has a total of 50. First, he needs to buy some materials to help him repair the entire place. He plans to use the players to gather resources and reinforce the walls of the sanatorium. It's a 100% hardcore game. If you die, you can never log in again, so hunting at the start is reckless. Of course, aside from tools, he'll also need food. Once players are activated, they are exactly like humans in this world and need food to recover energy. He figures that if they go hungry, they'll start handling things uncontrollably. At the very least, he needs to prepare enough food to sustain 5 adults for a week. But even though that doesn't seem like much, it still adds up to 70 tokens, since a meal usually costs 1 token. That is, if they eat pancakes. If, for example, he feeds them green wheat, then things will work out fine. He closes his door, thinking it's time to head back to the center, when suddenly he bumps into someone. The girl apologizes, and it turns out he's already met her. Her name is Yu Xiaoyu, the youngest daughter of a Yu family. A bit embarrassed, she says she heard noises coming from his house and thought someone was trying to steal from him. He thanks her, and she smiles. Then she says that whenever he's away, she keeps an eye on the place to make sure no one sneaks in. Since she has a lot of free time, it's not a problem for her. Chu Guang tells her she's being too kind to a stranger like him, so she should be more careful. But Yu Xiaoyu fires back, saying that first, she's not a child, and second, he once gave her soup when she was starving, so she's sure he's not such a bad guy after all. He hands her a piece of candy, telling her to take it as thanks. She gratefully accepts it, saying she's never had anything like it before. But the girl really has no idea how to eat it. She puts the whole thing in her mouth with the wrapper still on. He takes it back, removes the wrapper, and hands it to her again. She smiles and says it's sweet. She offers some to our guy, but he just laughs, pats her head, and says he's heading out. As he walks away, she yells that he doesn't need to worry. She'll keep watching over his house. Back at 404, 3 days have passed, and the players are about to log in. Yue hasn't even entered the game yet, and he's already smiling. A bright light flashes, and the player's senses start sharpening. He opens his eyes, the water tank begins to drain, and he steps out, along with 4 other players. The white-haired player is named Passing Shadow. His character is strength-based. The next one, Good Time, is looking down his own pants. He created a waifu with quite the figure, but he didn't turn into a man in the process. His character is agility-based. The last one, a long-haired guy, is named Gale Storm, and his character is intelligence-based. Everyone starts commenting on how realistic the game feels, and Yue agrees. As the door begins to open, they wonder if this is the infamous Chu Guang. The moment the door fully opens, Chu Guang speaks. A war came and left the world unrecognizable. And that is precisely why they, the players, were summoned to rebuild human civilization. He is the administrator of this place, codenamed Dawn. The assistant introduces itself as Sev and says it's looking forward to learning from them. The players stare in disbelief. Meanwhile, the system congratulates our guide for bringing in 4 people and leaving them in shock. Chu Guang is confident that he's already established who's in charge here. The players start questioning if he's really an AI. They say he's no different from a real person, which is insane. But they also want to know where Mr. Guang is. The protagonist tells them to stop asking questions. If anyone wants to leave the game, they just have to return to the capsule. For now, they should follow him as he goes over the survival guide. While walking through the forest, Chu Guang explains, the first rule is that everyone must obey him. This is absolute. Anyone who disobeys will be punished with forced hibernation. Right away, Yui says this administrator is basically like a game master with the power to ban people. Gale Storm and Shadow agree that for now, considering all the work Chu Guang put into bringing them here, it's probably best to just go along with it. At that moment, the protagonist looks back and says, it's been 200 years since the wars. The fact they're even standing here is a stroke of luck. He needs them to quickly understand the situation so they can start rebuilding their homeland. The forest they're in is located north of the city, far from any radiation. Their first mission is to pick up the axe on the ground and start gathering wood. Not only do they need something to keep warm for the winter, but they also need to begin rebuilding the sanatorium. The players are still convinced it's just a game, and they're hyped, talking about how awesome it'll be to rebuild their homeland. However, Chu Guang warns them not to wander too far. There are plenty of mutants out there. As soon as the players start gathering wood, our guy immediately tells Sev to keep an eye on them and report any threats. Moments later, the sound of axes chopping fills the air and trees begin to fall. Gale Storm comments that Shadow is swinging his axe with way too much ease. Yui says it's nothing special, but he's already imagining how great it would be if he were 10 times stronger. Good Time chimes in, saying it's probably related to the differences in their character attributes. Those attributes must be based on reality, since the capsules scan each of them to create their avatars. He's excited about how realistic and strategic this game feels. Then Ui tells them to hurry up and keep moving in that direction, asking his friends if they think they'll find any elves in the forest. Shadow, being more realistic, reminds him that this is a post-nuclear apocalypse setting, so there's probably nothing but a bunch of mutants. The other two tell Yue to stop trying to escape reality. The administrator was very clear about not leaving the area. Still chopping at the tree, Yue is annoyed, wondering why he should even listen to an NPC. That's when he suddenly feels something strange and lets go of his axe. His whole body trembles, and he wonders why he's getting this terrible feeling, as if something awful is about to happen. Something then rushes past him, nearly hitting him. He stumbles to the ground and looks up, seeing a flurry of feathers and a massive bird flying overhead. But when he turns to get a better look, he realizes it's a gigantic mutant. He knows there's no way he can dodge in time, while Sev is already sprinting back to the base, yelling that something terrible has happened. At that moment, Chu Guang was in the middle of receiving rewards for recruiting 4 players. One of the rewards was the substance extractor. It seemed to be something that allowed him to synthesize new players. For it to work, he needed to extract natural materials from creatures and corpses. The item materialized as a giant tube in the middle of the base. He was intrigued. The manual said even mutants could be processed with it. Excited to start collecting materials and testing it out, Seb suddenly bursts in, reporting that they have a problem. A giant bird is attacking the players north of the sanatorium. The scene shifts back to the forest, where the players have managed to rescue Yi Wei, but they're still being circled from above. Since to them this is just a game, they're surprisingly calm, even joking that Yi Wei's dodging skills have been pretty impressive. Good Time then says he's sure this creature must be one of the mutants from the website. Confused, Yi Wei asks what website he's talking about. As far as he remembers, there was only a registry. That's when Gale Storm mentions the mutant gallery, where all the creatures were listed. Yi Wei shakes his head and tells him to focus. They need to figure out how to deal with this giant crow. Good Time tells them to stay calm and not panic. If the creature doesn't attack, they should just hold their ground. Gale Storm stands there, asking what the plan is. Then he looks to the side, only to realize his friends have already bolted into the bushes. At that moment, something whizzes past the giant bird, which barely dodges in time. Everyone looks around, wondering who threw the rock, but obviously, it wasn't any of them. The crow locks eyes with its attacker. It was Chu Guang. He throws another, and the bird flinches, now turning its attention toward him. He grabs the steel rod and smirks, saying that a beast, in the end, is still just a beast. Even if it had 2 heads, it still wouldn't match human intelligence. Man, I thought he was going to dodge at the last second, but the guy straight up Sparta-speared it in the chest. The players, still hiding in the bushes, are stunned. They whisper about how ridiculously strong this NPC is. Everyone agrees the administrator is truly formidable. A little while later, the mutant bird's meat is roasting over a fire. The great thing about these giant mutant creatures is that 1 kill equals food for days. The players seem hesitant to eat it since, well, it's a mutant. But Chu Guang reassures them that there's no problem. He explains that scientifically speaking, this creature was nothing more than an eagle. The players are still freaked out by its sheer size, but he tells them gamma rays changed a lot in this world. Besides, they need to stay focused, because a beast like this is the least of their worries. He sighs, thinking the saddest part is that there's no salt to make it taste better. Unfortunately, that's a luxury item. Still, he tells the players they're lucky. Having good food in this world is rare. Yi Wei mentions that they won't be able to eat all of this in one sitting, and Gale Storm suggests putting it in the refrigerator. But Chu Guang laughs. Even the mayor, the so-called king of the castle in this place, only has 1 refrigerator. The players start thinking about this whole mayor castle situation. Yi Wei, of course, is already imagining himself arriving at a castle surrounded by beautiful girls pampering him. Good Time then asks how much wood they actually need, to which Chu Guang replies, as much as you can gather. Our guy is starting to realize that these newcomers are nothing like him. They can leave anytime and don't feel a sense of urgency at all. To keep them engaged in the game, he needs a reward system. So he tells them they'll be working under the contribution points system. The bigger the tree, the more points they earn. And they better know, rewards will be extremely limited. For example, the bird leg he killed would be worth 5 contribution points. Everyone started saying they weren't as hungry anymore. Chu Guang then orders them back to work, and they all immediately dash toward the trees. A little while later, they return, exhausted. Chu Guang congratulates them and announces that, in total, they earned over 2,000 contribution points. Shadow alone racked up more than 800 and got the best cuts of the bird. Yi Wei and Good Time also did well, earning 450 each. Meanwhile, poor Gale Storm, with his intelligence-focused build, had no strength and was practically starving. Chu Guang is impressed. Their performance was better than he expected. On top of that, the eagle showing up was a blessing in disguise, since it would have been hard to convince them to cut down this many trees just for a few lollipops. He then explains that besides base rewards, they can also buy resurrection through the website, though they need to be careful because it takes 3 days to process. Shadow comments that it's not a lot of options, but his friends tell him to be patient. The game was just launched. At first, Chu Guang considered giving them some tokens, but there's a reason he chose not to. As the game master, he learned the language instantly. However, these guys wouldn't be able to communicate with the locals. Good Time points out that, aside from game functions, the base doesn't seem to have any usable power. Chu Guang nods, explaining that, unfortunately, they don't have a generator. The system provides just enough power to keep the game running, but nothing beyond that. The moment he mentions a reward for whoever can solve this issue, Gale Storm immediately sees his chance to shine. Yi Wei, being more straightforward, suggests digging a tunnel and stealing power from the system. But Chu Guang explains that even that energy is limited, they need a way to generate their own. By 5 p.m., it's already time to return to base since the area becomes extremely dangerous after dark. The players head inside, talking about how time flies in this game. It feels too real. Back inside, Chu Guang realizes he needs to start recruiting unemployed people or those with unusual work hours. Otherwise, he'll be left alone at night. and when the monsters attack, survival will be tough. Stev then asks if he wants to check the examinations conducted on the clones. Chu Guang is confused, so Stev explains that every time a player enters the capsule, they undergo an analysis. The system tracks their genetic development. For example, passing Shadow has a strength gene, and every time he logs in and out, they can measure how much is progressing. It's impossible to reach 100%, which would make him a peak human in terms of strength. But something like that would take a long time, especially since he's currently at 0.3. The rest of the players, who barely use their abilities, are at 0.1. Meanwhile, Yiwei has a perception talent. Obviously, the more they experience, the more they evolve, and Yiwei's pervy antics don't count toward progress. Chu Guang sums it up. Basically, this group of nudes has potential and arrived with natural talents. Back in Kunming University's dormitory, our beloved player Gale Storm wakes up in his bed. His real name is Yan Feng. He looks determined, ready to study how to build a generator so he can create one in the game. At lunchtime, he enters the cafeteria and a guy rushes past. In the corner, a group of girls is swooping over Professor Wang, saying it's unbelievable that he's only 30 years old. Wang greets the students and tells them to hurry up and eat or they'll go hungry. If all the professor did was say that, and these girls are madly in love, something about him is weird. Meanwhile, Wang notices Yan Feng sitting alone studying generator blueprints. Curious, he asks him a question and Yan Feng responds that he's reading an apocalyptic novel. The professor looks a bit confused, so Yan Feng clarifies he's researching how survivors would solve the electricity problem. Wang raises an eyebrow and leans in closer, making Yan Feng blush slightly. He asks, are you really into this novel, or are you actually traveling to a post-apocalyptic world? This professor is hacking. Yan Feng adjusts his glasses, but deep inside is panicking. There's no way this guy knows about the beta test when only 4 people were selected. Thankfully, Wang backs off and laughs, saying not to take it too seriously. He was just joking. At that moment, Yan Feng realizes Wang isn't one of the players. Then Wang mentions that if he wants to learn how to build a generator, he first needs to understand some history. Yan Feng immediately starts explaining that the story takes place 200 years after a nuclear war. Without hesitation, Wang points out that it would be difficult since most electrical equipment would have been destroyed by electromagnetic pulses. Yan Feng suggests salvaging generators from abandoned houses and restaurants, since they're simpler and harder to damage. However, Wang tells him time has already ruined those. But there's one solution and Yan Feng is ready to take notes. Wang explains that every car is equipped with an alternator and with a few modifications can generate 12 watts of electricity, which is enough to power a light bulb. However, if you manage to add an inverter to the connection, he might generate up to 240 watts, which would be enough to power a refrigerator. Yan Feng frantically takes notes while the professor watches, thinking the kid is way too invested in this story. Wang waves goodbye, saying he has a class to teach, and Yan Feng thanks him. Just as he turns to leave, he gets blocked by a group of girls eagerly waiting to learn a lot from him. No idea what kind of love this is, but they're practically begging him to be their tutor and help them with their homework at their place. As hearts practically float around them, Yan Feng sighs, knowing he needs to ask the administrator where he can find a car. That's when his phone starts blowing up with notifications and he decides to check. Turns out Good Time has already posted a review about everything that happened in the game. Inside his room, golden trophies are stacked on his shelf. It looks like this guy isn't fast for no reason. Apparently he's not a runner, but rather a speedrunner. The guy's a pro gamer. He says he'll start a live stream to explain the game mechanics because he's too lazy to type it all out. He describes how the NPCs are incredibly realistic, even having some kind of friendship meter. Keep in mind, the players think Chu Guang is just the guy who invited them to the game, while Dawn is just an NPC. They don't realize they're the same person. Good Time explains that sensations in the game feel very realistic except for extreme pain. Getting pinched on the cheek stings slightly, but when he crushed his hand with a rock, it didn't hurt that badly. He warns that it's a difficult game and not for everyone, but he's enjoying the experience. Apparently, Good Time is a professional FPS player and also skilled at MOBAs. The only request he has for the developers is to let players choose their character's gender. Chu Guang watches the stream and knows exactly why this guy is asking for that feature. Because of Good Time's live stream, 25 people now want to join the game. Since he's a big name in competitive gaming, a lot of his fans are curious. The good part is that Good Time already created a group chat and made Chu Guang the admin, so he can send the game link whenever he wants. Chu Guang quickly introduces himself in the group as the administrator, offering to answer questions. Immediately, everyone spams emojis grabbing onto his legs, acting like desperate newbies. He explains the attribute system, which reflects real-life skills. He also clarifies that appearance and gender can't be changed, that he shows them how affection levels work. At 10 affection, a girl will call you a broke loser and tell you to disappear. At 100 affection, she'll offer you any weapon you want, and there's even a secret event. Hearing this, the pervy guy is already hooked. Chu Guang then logs out of the chat, saying he's going back to work, and tells them to check the official site. He slumps back in his chair, feeling relieved. For now, things are going smoothly, and the players seem engaged. But then, he remembers something Good Times said. The players need a headset to log in. He suddenly wonders, if that's the case, how did he himself end up in this world? He asks Seb if there's any record of him being connected to a headset before arriving here. After a moment, Seb responds that he checked all the logs and there's nothing. Chu Guang shrugs it off but decides he wants to analyze his own body to check his attributes. His Great Master class is already at level 5 with stats ranging from 6 to 8. His genetic development is at 5%, a huge gap compared to everyone else who are stuck at 0 or 1%. Considering this, he starts thinking that maybe he should help the players explore. With stats like his, it doesn't make sense to just sit around hiding. At that moment, he receives quest rewards, including some secret ones like a bonus for having players log in for over 8 hours. Deciding to open an intermediate box, Sev immediately gets excited, eager to see what's inside. What he receives is a muscle cell enhancement injection. It boosts strength slightly, but can only be used once every 24 hours. The liquid is neon red, and he can't help but feel suspicious about it. Sev tells him to relax, reassuring him that everything here is top quality. Chu Guang, already determined, decides to test it on himself. He doesn't want to risk killing the players. He injects it, flexes his arm, and throws a few punches. Nothing seems too different. He stares at the vial, wondering if it's expired or if there's some hidden effect. Then suddenly, his heart pounds hard. A surge of energy spreads through his body, seemingly concentrating in his heart. For a moment, he gets excited, but seconds later, the power fades away. He sighs, maybe it really was expired since it's 200 years old. He throws a few more punches but feels little to no change. At least it didn't make him sick. Stev analyzes his body to determine what happened. At that moment, his strength and constitution have increased by 1 point, a direct effect of the injection. Stev explains that 5 is the base level for all attributes. Since Chu Guang is already at 9, he's about twice as strong as an average person who has never trained in their life. Considering that, he realizes that 1 attribute point equals about 20% more strength than a normal adult. Not bad at all. He checks the time, 4 a.m. In 30 minutes, the players will log in. It's time to get ready. Man, these guys were logging in at 4:30 a.m. They were seriously grinding levels. Stev goes off to prepare things, and at that moment, a new mission arrives. Actually, not just one. 20 of them drop at once. They involve hunting mutants, collecting water, and repairing the base. The mutant hunt mission seems to be a daily task, but he decides to ignore it for now since the players are way too weak. He'd love to have a luxurious life at the base where he doesn't have to do all of this, but without electricity, it's impossible. He decides to check on the new players who signed up. Maybe someone would be useful for this. There were already 35 registrations, and 10 of them he hadn't even reviewed yet. His strategy of putting girls on the registration screen had worked, but at the same time, he sees that some guys are signing up for the wrong reasons. He figured that the only women joining would be players uninterested in survival, meaning they were low-quality recruits for his needs. To filter out casuals, he makes the registration process harder by requiring a phone number and address. This way, only the most dedicated players would get through. Right then, a message pops up in the chat and a girl glances at it. She seems relieved that it's not a client annoying her since she's got a massive headache today. She works at a design company as part of Dog's Body, the same group as Good Time. She scrolls through the chat, seeing Good Time and Unite hyping up the game, calling it super realistic and immersive. She starts suspecting they were paid off. No way a game this good actually exists. She sees Chu Guang pop up again, saying he'll put those reviews on the website. Then she notices the registration link and hesitates. She knows Good Time is an elite player. If he's praising the game, it might be worth a try. She clicks the link and the site opens with 2 very well-proportioned girls on display. A message asks her to comment on her interests and hobbies, which will determine which of the 5 attributes she'll develop. Strength lets you carry more weight and deal more damage with thrown objects. Agility increases speed, helps evade attacks and escape creatures. Constitution improves regeneration, boosts resistance to poisons, and allows consumption of peculiar foods. Intelligence isn't just about smarts. It also improves control over neural devices. Perception heightens intuition, letting players sense danger before it happens. After reading all that, she thinks the game doesn't seem that special. But then something catches her eye. The message states that, just like in real life, you don't get to choose your appearance at birth, so you can't customize your character here either. In the future, there will be advanced plastic surgery and cybernetic enhancements, but for now, everyone is basic. Since she's a designer, the concept of future plastic surgery and cyber enhancements intrigues her. With curiosity sparked, she decides to give the game a shot and see if it inspires her. She registers, excited to experience this futuristic design. Meanwhile, Chu Guang checks his panel. New registrations keep rolling in, and he's pleased. But when he looks at the clock, 6 a.m., he knows there are more important things to handle. Back in the game, the player's perception abilities activate and Yue wakes up. Shadow checks his stats, frowning. Why do I have 3 intelligence? I feel dumb as hell. Meanwhile, Yang complains about the opposite. He feels way too weak. Strangely, Yue wakes up clutching his stomach, immediately asking where the bathroom is. Sev, however, delivers bad news. The base doesn't have one. Yue wants to curse out the robot, but his friends hold him back, reminding him that insulting the NPC might ruin their relationship. However, his heightened perception is only making things worse. He senses something terrible is about to happen. At that moment, Chu Guang appears, telling everyone to line up and stay calm. They obey, but Ui is clearly suffering. Chu Guang, keeping up his serious administrator image, announces that winter is coming and they must finish the base ASAP. They need to gather essential supplies, and the full list is posted at the sanatorium entrance. Shadow and Good Time are hyped, while Yanfeng wonders where the generator mission is. Then Chu Guang asks if anyone has questions. Ui immediately raises his hand. Where the hell is the bathroom in this cursed base? Chu Guang pauses, realizing that even basic human needs will be an issue in the base. Still, he motions for Yue to follow him. Then suddenly, the other 3 players feel something weird in their stomachs. Turns out, last night's mutant bird meat didn't sit well with them. Moments later, the players drop to the ground, clutching their stomachs as a foul stench fills the air. Sometime later, they return to Chu Guang, looking utterly destroyed. Good Time groans that life is tough without a bathroom, while Shadow almost sliced himself using a leaf to clean up. Chu Guang thinks to himself, he should have told them to use moss instead. Wait, but isn't moss worse? Wouldn't that just make things even worse? Suddenly, all the players take a step toward him. Chu Guang blinks, confused. Everyone raises their hands, unanimously declaring that building a bathroom should be the top priority for the base. Shadow suggests not only making a toilet, but also a system to collect waste, mix it with sand and wood chips, and turn it into fertilizer. Looks like those 3 intelligence points of his are finally paying off. Chu Guang recalls hearing that Charlie's Town does something similar since every resource is valuable in this world. Good Time then chimes in, saying they could use biovis to produce methane, which could even power a generator. He explains how such a system works and how it could turn into a self-sustaining energy station. Chu Guang finds it an excellent idea, considering they could probably find a biotank somewhere in this world. He stays calm but praises the players, secretly thinking that these nudes are actually coming up with brilliant ideas. Then Yanfeng raises a concern. Both ideas require storage tanks to contain the gases. Chu Guang reassures him that this won't be a problem. There are tons of PET bottles scattered around since nobody in this world dares to burn plastic. Pointing to a notice board, he explains that the missions and rewards are listed there. There are tasks to gather wood, find containers for water storage, and collect recyclable materials. Now he adds a new mission, finding storage compartments for gas collection. The players are genuinely impressed by how advanced this NPC is. Yui notices Dawn smirking, while passing Shadow finds it odd that the NPC just created a new mission based on their suggestions. Suddenly, Yanfeng raises his hand again and claims to have a more efficient method for generating power. He asks if there are any cars nearby since most vehicles could be used for energy production. Chu Guang tells him about a parking lot he checked before, but it was mostly junk. Despite this, Feng insists on taking a look. Our guy agrees, but warns them that the area is full of dangerous mutants, so Feng needs to bring a second player. Everyone immediately assumes that passing Shadow will be chosen as his perfect duo. At that moment, Seb walks up beside Chu Guang, making a serious expression. Then Chu Guang points at Yue and says he's going instead, due to his perception skill. Yue reluctantly accepts, while passing Shadow is confused about why he wasn't chosen. Chu Guang tells them to gear up before heading out, exploring the parking lot. After some time, Feng, with a map in hand, arrives at the parking lot. Seeing the place covered in vines and in complete ruins, he immediately understands why Chu Guang said there was nothing useful here. Yue scoffs, already doubting the trip, and asks why they don't just head back since there's no way they'll find a generator here. Feng refuses. We're already here. We're not leaving empty-handed. He moves toward a car, trying to lift the hood, but the vines are too thick. He calls Yue over to help with the muscle work, and though reluctant, Yue agrees. As they get ready to pry it open, Yue pauses, realizing that although he's been playing with Feng for years, he has no idea what he does in real life. On the count of 3, they lift the hood. Peering inside, Yue asks if Feng can see the whole generator now. Feng just gives him a look. Didn't you say you know how to drive? Yue proudly replies, yeah, in racing games. Feng sighs, then asks if Yue owns a car, since he's acting like he knows what he's talking about. Yue shakes his head. Still in university. All I've got is a bicycle. After checking the entire car, Feng wipes the sweat off his forehead and admits that while he didn't find the battery, he did find the generator. Yue comments that finding a battery in a post-apocalyptic world is nearly impossible since they're too valuable. Feng agrees but starts thinking maybe pre-war technology in this world didn't rely on traditional batteries. If they used wireless power transmission, the chances of finding a working generator would be slim. That's when Yue suddenly calls out, saying he found something amazing. Feng rushes over expecting a generator, but Yue proudly points to a suspicious-looking hole in the ground. Feng frowns. That looks dangerous. Yue, however, is confident his perception isn't giving off any warnings. Even so, Feng advises him to wait, since the administrator never mentioned this. It could be risky. But with a mischievous grin, Yue reminds him, "You're the one who said we can't go back empty-handed." His mind is already racing, imagining that this is just like a game dungeon, probably filled with goblins to fight and girls to rescue. His fantasy goes wild as he envisions the rewards. Meanwhile, Feng thinks more logically. If this were an apocalypse survival game, the treasure chest at the end would contain a generator. Both of them light up with excitement, convinced they're about to strike gold. Of course, before leaving, Chu Guang warned them to avoid risks and not fight anything unnecessary. Still, they enter the dark tunnel, moving forward cautiously. Around them, they spot strange-looking mushrooms growing along the walls. Ui examines them but doesn't recognize them. Feng admits he's never seen them in real life either, meaning they might be native to this world. The blonde guy picks one up, noting that its pattern is unusual. Might be a good idea to bring some back for analysis. Before long, they pull out a trash bag and start stuffing it with mushrooms. Time passes, and they've gathered everything they can find, thinking about heading back. But then Yui suddenly takes off running deeper into the tunnel, shouting that he feels safe, meaning there must be something even better ahead. Suddenly, Yui froze in place and started trembling. His danger sense kicked in. It was the same feeling he had when the eagle attacked him. A roar echoed from the end of the cave. Definitely a mutant. Without hesitation, he sprinted back, shouting for Feng to run as well. Something was coming. A giant carnivorous plant emerged from the darkness, chasing after them. Back at the base, meanwhile, Good Time and Shadow were exhausted after building bathrooms. Shu Guang appeared, praising them and announcing that they each earned 200 contribution points. He reminded them to separate urine from feces, as they needed to be used for different purposes. However, the two had worked all day and were still recovering from their food poisoning, so the place stank horribly. Shu Guang ordered them to take a bath. The problem? The only water source is a natural river, which could have mutants. Plus, if they caught an infection, they had no medicine yet. The guys are getting into the construction mindset, and Good Time immediately suggested building a bathhouse. Their real motivation? When the girls arrive, they won't want to stay unless there's a bath, he said, already imagining the perfect setup. Shadow agreed, saying it'd be even better if they helped each other bathe, getting closer over time. Shu Guang was starting to realize something. His marketing choices were attracting only one type of player. At that moment, the two idiots came running, screaming for help. Ui barely stopped in time before falling into the pit they had dug earlier. Unfortunately, Feng couldn't stop fast enough and crashed into him. The bag of mushrooms flew into the air and both of them fell straight into the bathroom pit. Shadow, watching from above, reassured them, "Relax, guys. There are plenty of leaves down there." Meanwhile, Chu Guang picked up one of the mushrooms and, seeing how hard they had worked, told everyone to go take a bath. Dinner and the dangerous mushrooms. Sometime later, they heated water for the bath and prepared a meal. Chu Guang was impressed at how eagerly they ate. Curious, he asked Feng where they found the mushrooms, but before he could answer, Yui interrupted, claiming he was the one who found them. Yui then cautiously asked if the mushrooms were safe to eat. Chu Guang sighed in relief, at least they hadn't tested them yet. He explained, "These mushrooms are called blue angels. An hour after eating them, you turn into an angel." The players froze. "Wait, what do you mean by that?" "It's a deadly poison," he clarified. However, he also remembered Charlie mentioning that they could be used to cure non-lethal radiation damage. In other words, they were the perfect ingredient to make radiation-neutralizing medicine. Then he delivered another warning. They were lucky because these mushrooms only grow in places where mutant leeches exist. These creatures start off tiny, but they can grow up to 3 meters long and devour an entire human. The players' faces went pale. They realized that by entering the depths of that tunnel, they had basically knocked on death's door. Feng marked the sewer location on the map and shared it with Chu Guang, who rewarded them with some contribution points. Although the mushrooms were extremely valuable, he couldn't give too many points. Otherwise, players would start thinking that taking risks was the key to winning. The bigger issue was that he hadn't realized a mutant leech nest was so close. This was dangerous for new players who would be arriving soon. At the very least, he could sell the mushrooms and earn some tokens. He then told the group he was heading out to gather resources, instructing them that at 5 p.m., Seb would open the base gates for them to return. Good Time's theory is Dawn an NPC. Sometime later, after the campfire died down, Good Time brought up an inconsistency. He found it strange that gathering rare mushrooms awarded the same points as chopping wood. Not only that, but they had found a dangerous dungeon and still received a low reward. After thinking it over, he realized something. The administrator's priority right now is for us to survive. That's why risky actions are giving us fewer points. That meant missions weren't as important as the main goal of base 404, survival and improvement. The proof? They went searching for a generator, didn't find one, and still got rewarded. Everyone started nodding in agreement. Good Time raised a thumbs up and declared, "If we want bigger rewards, we have to surprise the administrator with things he doesn't expect." Then he hesitated. But this only makes sense if the game is 100% realistic in every way. His expression darkened as he connected the dots. "Seb's eye is way weaker than Dawn's," he muttered. That would only make sense if Dawn was actually controlled by a real person. Passing Shadow's eyes widened in shock. "Wait, are you saying he's lying to us?" Good Time's IQ just jumped to 200. Yue and Passing Shadow froze, not sure what to do with this information. Good Time shrugged, saying, "For now, it's just a suspicion. Besides, the guy hasn't done anything bad to us." Then he raised his hand, declaring that the four of them should work together to survive this closed beta. Even if Dawn turned out to be a real person, they should stick together and share everything they found. Even if Dawn tried to stop them, everyone nodded, eager to take their first steps as a team. Good time turned to Feng. For now, we should start mapping out mutant locations. He told Feng to take Yi Wei, and the moment Yi Wei sensed danger, they had to run. Meanwhile, Yi Wei was still wondering, since when did this guy become the leader? Good Time was already issuing commands, even sending Passing Shadow back to cutting wood to prepare for winter. Meanwhile, back in the apocalyptic city, a group of chained people was walking through the apocalyptic city, and among them was a blonde girl. Her design alone made it clear she was going to be an important character in the story. The scavengers of the wasteland immediately took notice, murmuring that they couldn't afford to waste an asset like her. As the merchants unloaded their goods, Walter stood watching from the shadows. At the same time, Charlie welcomed Mr. Lai to Burt Street, greeting him warmly. Li Dayu, a slave trader, had delivered exactly what their leader requested. He assured them that she was high-quality stock, so they shouldn't waste her in just a few days. A risky deal. Just as this was happening, Xu Guang arrived, and the moment he saw Li Dayu, he recognized him. Even more surprising, the blonde girl looked exactly like one of the legendary clones stored in his base. He immediately realized that only the city's mayor could afford to buy something this valuable in the apocalypse. But today, he had something valuable too. Mushrooms. Maybe he could use them to his advantage. Li Dayu strolled through the city streets, tossing tokens to the poor, telling them to get lost. When he turned a corner, he came face to face with Xu Guang, who called out to him. Dayu stopped, eyeing him suspiciously. Who the hell are you? Xu Guang raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture, knowing he was taking a risk by approaching him. At least with his nano-protection vest, he could survive a few bullets before dying. Dayu chuckled, quickly identifying him. So you're the new survivor from Burt Street? Huh. Xu Guang introduced himself, but Dayu cut him off immediately. I don't care about your name. I don't do small trades. If you got junk to sell, take it to Charlie. But Xu Guang smirked, pulling out a bag filled with 2 kilograms of mushrooms. You sure this is junk? Dayu's expression shifted. He was interested. Where'd you find this? The sewers, Xu Guang answered. Dave asked for the price, and Xu Guang set it at 200 tokens. It was a ridiculously high price, much more than what these were worth in the city. But to his surprise, Dayu accepted immediately. That's when Xu Guang realized something. These mushrooms were worth way more than he expected. The mayor was probably buying everything cheap and reselling it at insane prices to live the high life. Before handing over the tokens, Dayu warned him. Charlie must not find out about this trade. Xu Guang simply nodded in agreement. Then Dayu offered him a deal. I can give you 200 tokens, or I can give you an item at a 20% discount. Xu Guang knew the discount was a scam, but the trade taxes would be cheaper than at Burt Street, so he asked if Dayu had weapons. Dayu shrugged. That's easy, he said, handing over a non-automatic rifle and offering 30 extra bullets as a bonus. Xu Guang tested the weapon, then asked if this price included the supposed 20% discount. Yeah, but if you want, you can take a pistol for 100 tokens instead, Dayu said. But that only works on humans, not mutants. Xu Guang knew merchants in this world were crooks, so he pushed the negotiation further. I want the rifle, 60 bullets, and 25 tokens to buy food. Dayu clearly wasn't in the mood to negotiate, but Xu Guang sweetened the deal. He hinted that the sewer had way more mushrooms, proposing it as an investment opportunity. If you sell at this price, I'll bring back 10 times this amount next time. Dayu immediately understood what was happening. The protagonist was asking for an investment, and he was interested. If he could take these mushrooms to the main city, he could mass-produce radiation neutralizers and make a fortune. Knowing this could be worth over 100 rifles in profits, Dayu agreed instantly. He extended his hand, grinning. We're partners now. I hope we can work well together. Xu Guang shook his hand, putting on a polite smile. It's an honor to do business with you. But in his mind, he swore one day he would make this bastard pay for all the money he was stealing today. Dayu's final offer. With the deal sealed, Dayu mentally noted that these unknown wasteland territories were the best places for profit. Xu Guang took his weapon and tokens, and Dayu gave him an exception, a rare privilege in their world. Before leaving, Dayu leaned in and gave him a final warning. Near those mushrooms, there are tons of mutant leeches. They always move in packs, so be careful. Xu Guang's stomach dropped. His players had only seen one leech, but there could be dozens lurking nearby. Even worse, leeches in this world had insane regeneration. Some could regrow even after being sliced apart. The best way to kill them was burning them, but that would destroy the mushrooms too. Before Xu Guang could think further, Dayu clapped him on the shoulder, snapping him out of his thoughts. This will be my last trip this year. I'll be back one last time at the end of the month, he said. Once winter starts, I won't return. Xu Guang wasn't too concerned about tokens. He needed equipment. I'm more interested in your goods, he replied. Dayu grinned and signaled for his assistant, who brought out a tablet. Xu Guang scrolled through the options. The guy had real high-end gear, armor, night vision goggles, but then he found exactly what he needed. A wood-powered generator, priced at 1,200 tokens, and an exoskeleton suit that enhanced strength, flexibility, and agility. Dayu laughed, complimenting the exoskeleton but calling the generator a ridiculous choice. You're better off buying batteries instead, he said. I even have a cheap battery exchange program. He added, nobody wants generators in this world. There are very few bases left standing. Where the hell are you even planning to put it? Shu Guang simply smiled. Don't worry, I won't be using it in Burt Street. Dayu raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. All right then, he said, turning away. I'll see you at the end of the month. Shu Guang asked about the 20% discount, but Dayu just laughed, saying he'd already given him a massive deal. As Dayu walked away, Shu Guang made a heart symbol with his hands, thinking to himself that one day he'd get revenge on these damn merchants. It was too late to head back to the base, so he'd have to spend the night in his makeshift shelter. A harsh tax and a familiar face. As he walked through the survivor camp, he overheard vendors calling out, selling soap, food, and scraps. Many people were trying to sell junk to Charlie, but the old man wasn't interested. That's when Shu Guang heard someone announcing a message from the mayor. A man carrying a signboard read out loud. All city residents must deliver 90 kilograms of wood and 2 meters of leather before the end of the month. Spread the word. The survivors barely reacted. They were already used to this. This was why winter was always brutal, but trying to survive outside the city was even worse. Dawn knew exactly what was happening. This was just the mayor hoarding resources so he could profit off the merchants when everyone else was too weak to work. Still, it didn't matter to him. He wouldn't be in the city when winter came. As he continued walking, he saw Yu Xiaoyu arguing with someone. A boy named Wang Defu was telling her to stop guarding an abandoned house. You need to let this place go. The guy who lived here is dead. She got angry, shouting, he's not dead. Wang shrugged, insisting, the guy's been missing for days. He tried to negotiate, saying she could keep a piece of the door while he'd take a mattress. But Yu Xiaoyu refused and told him to get lost. Annoyed, Wang raised his fist and threatened to take everything by force. Before he could get her, Shu Guang grabbed his arm, stopping him cold. Who said I was dead? Yu Xiaoyu beamed, knowing she had backup now. She simply smiled at Wang and said, he wants to fight you. Go ahead. Shu Guang pulled her into a protective hug and stared Wang Defu down. As long as I'm here, no one lays a hand on her. Then he called out Wang's name directly. You gonna stand there, or do you want me to help you leave? Wang trembled, especially when Shu Guang reached for his steel rod. Without another word, Wang bolted, shouting, my father's gonna hear about this. Shu Guang handed Yu Xiaoyu a lollipop for protecting his house. But just as she was opening it, a group of men appeared behind her, demanding to know what she was doing. She immediately ran off, and Shu Guang realized something. She was forbidden from talking to outsiders. A man stopped in front of him. It was Yu Hu, the second son of the Yu family. I thought you were dead, man. You disappeared for days. Shu Guang smirked. Looks like you thought wrong. Yu Hu nodded. Yeah, I guess so. He then mentioned that they had gathered some wood, but their biggest challenge was getting 6 meters of leather since there were only 3 men in their household. They were planning to hunt deer in the northern forest. Shu Guang thanked him for the tip but said he'd make his own plans. His biggest concern? The deer were close to his base, and if the players and survivors ran into each other, things could get messy. Yu Hu then warned him, you only got rid of Wang Defu because he was alone. The Wang family is big. If they come after you, you'll need backup. Then with a grin, Yu Hu offered a solution. My sister's getting married next year. Join my family and we'll have 4 strong men together. Before Shu Guang could even react, Wang Defu sprinted away, shouting that he wasn't afraid of the Wang family. Yu Hu just stood there, confused, wondering why he rejected such a good offer. Back at the base, building solutions. The next morning, outside the sanatorium, the players had cut a ton of wood, but it still needed processing. They had 3 options. Burn it to harden it, apply a protective coating, and let it dry. Soak it in water, but they'd need containers and rain. Shu Guang explained that without proper treatment, the wood would rot even if they built a perfect wall around the base. Good Time had an idea. Why not make cement using all the leftover concrete around them? Passing Shadow pointed out that the concrete itself couldn't be processed, but they could use it for makeshift structures. The problem? They needed coal and a high-temperature furnace. Just then, Yue appeared, hyped up. They had made a huge discovery. A small lake had formed in the eastern region. It wasn't on any map, meaning it was relatively new. They mapped out the entire area, noting any mutant sightings. Yue dug through his bag, showing off a detailed map with every dangerous location marked. Passing Shadow immediately asked, did you find any cement? Fang nodded. We found a thick, clay-like material near the lake. Yue grinned, admitting the real reason he insisted on checking the area. He thought he'd stumble into a classic scene, a girl bathing in the forest. Instead, Fang saw a valuable construction material. Passing Shadow tested it, feeling its density and texture, then smiled. With this, we have a solution for making a furnace. They asked why they needed the material, and Good Time explained that their first plan was to make cement to reinforce the base's defenses. Fang raised an eyebrow, questioning, are we sure this will even work? Passing Shadow nodded, explaining, even though this is a game, it's 100% realistic. If everything here follows the laws of nature, then our imagination is the only limit, so why not try? First, that wasn't enough material to build the furnace, so they would have to fetch a few more buckets. Wei was already suspecting that Shadow worked in construction, given how strong he was and how much he knew about these things. He then turned to Good Time and said that the two of them would keep cutting the tree. Everyone raised their hands, saying they would surprise the administrator and give their best. However, the very next second, Wei and Feng were running away from a bear, screaming for help. The two friends ran to assist, but right then, Feng tripped on a rock and fell to the ground. Wei told him to get up, but it was too late. The two-headed bear was already coming in for a bite. At that moment, Chu Guang woke up in his room and grabbed a weapon. He figured it must have all been just a nightmare, and for now, he was still on Burt Street, while thinking that it was the fault of those damn new players that the supplies he had accumulated had disappeared. What he wanted to know now was how the players were doing, since he had no idea how they were handling Sev or how Sev was organizing them. Just then, someone knocked on the door, asking if he was there and saying it was Xiaoyu. He opened it, took a look, and asked how he could help. She offered him a small cake and said it was for him. Our boy felt a bit awkward and took it from her hand, but she was actually signaling for him to come closer. Then she revealed that someone had told her to deliver the biscuit and say that she had made it herself. He immediately realized it was Yu's plan to make him like her and wondered what was going through that guy's head. Feeling a bit awkward, he asked why she had revealed the secret, and she said it was because she didn't like lying to others. Suddenly, a hooded guy asked if he was heading out for the hunt. Xiaoyu hid behind the protagonist and quickly said that this was Wang Defu's older brother. The little guy told him he better not die out there, but the brother just patted his shoulder, telling him not to go around spouting nonsense. He then simply walked past the protagonist. Their clothes brushed against each other. They exchanged a glance, but neither did anything. However, Chu Guang had already realized that this one was going to be tough to deal with. He waved goodbye to Xiaoyu, saying he was leaving, and she hid behind the door, telling him to be careful. He patted her head in thanks, thinking she was a good girl, but still too young. He'd have to wait a good few years. The group was heading out of the village, and old Charlie was watching them. Chu Guang went over to him to buy some food. In addition, he bought a few grams of tobacco meat. It was basically a natural preservative to make the meat last longer. Charlie then handed him the wheat he had requested, but asked if he hadn't bought quite a lot just a few days ago. Chu Guang asked what the problem was, and Charlie said there wasn't really one. It was good to stock up. But at that moment, Chu Guang noticed he was acting suspiciously. If the city mayor found out he was buying so much, he would probably think he was building a faction to take over the city. At that, he invited other apocalypse games where the characters had tons of power and could just jump around and grab whatever they wanted. He threw the sack over his shoulder and muttered that, unfortunately, this one was way too realistic. Charlie then commented that he might need a cow to carry all those resources. Chu Guang just thanked him, saying not for now, and Charlie wished him a safe journey. Our boy wanted to get out of there as fast as possible before trouble showed up. Back at the base, smoke was rising and the guys said the boss had returned. Chu Guang looked over, wanting to know why they had built a bunch of furnaces when that wasn't even part of the mission. Good Time smiled and ran over to him, saying that he had finally returned. Chu Guang explained that it got too late to come back and asked if they had found any survivors or mutants. Good Time replied that they hadn't, but had built several earthen furnaces to start producing cement. First, they would burn the trees until they turned to ashes. Then, they would mix them with water to extract the potassium from the top. With the water removed, they would get calcium hydroxide and also calcium carbonate. After that, they would mix everything inside the furnace and finally get cement. Chu Guang remembered trying something similar before, but since he didn't know all the techniques, everything had gone wrong. While Good Time was daydreaming, already imagining the perfect building, he then revealed that they were also extracting sweat from plastics to better control the leather and turn it into shoes. Chu Guang tried to stay calm and told them they had done a great job, even though he had no idea how he was going to reward all of this. Beaming, Good Time said it was an honor to share the will to rebuild this world, while thinking that this was the perfect move to earn a bunch of affection points with this NPC. The guys were already grabbing him by the neck, telling him to stop stealing credit since everyone had worked on it. Besides, it was clear that Shadow already had 1% of his gene developed. Our boy praised them and said that as a reward, he would try to get them an assistant. He realized that strength was essential, so maybe a few players of that type would be perfect. But Chu Guang and the guys were looking for a different kind of player, weren't they, folks? A young and beautiful one. Chu Guang simply replied that he would take it into consideration. The guys saluted him, saying that this was their life mission. With that, they all ran off, saying they were going back to work. Shortly after, Chu Guang was back in his office and saw that he had received new rewards. He had earned 7 points and decided to spend them on basic crates since he needed more food. However, what he got was 5 lollipops, a chocolate bar, and at least a little bit of salt. The problem was that it was only 400 grams, which wouldn't be nearly enough for cooking. On the other hand, you could trade this salt for a lower quality one and get a much larger quantity. But that would be risky since so few people should have access to salt of this quality. It would only draw attention. For now, he had to really focus on rebuilding the base. He took a look at the group of people interested in the game, and the messages kept pouring in. The problem was that none of them seemed very interesting, until he saw a guy named Mosquito, who was posting tables about things that could be extracted just from wood. That definitely caught Chu Guang's attention, especially since the guy seemed to know how to obtain acetone, which was perfect for him. He immediately clicked on the guy's profile, wanting to know who he was. In the gallery, he saw a photo of the guy's workplace and concluded that he made furniture using wood. That would be great, considering that wood was what he had been stockpiling all this time. He then sent a message to the guy, asking if he would be interested in testing the game. While measuring some wood, Mosquito received a message in the group. As soon as he picked up his phone, he saw that it was from Chu Guang, but had no idea who he was. That is, until he was startled by the revelation that this was the person offering game tests. Mosquito wanted proof that it was really him, but Chu Guang just sent the link and told him to check it out. The guy hesitated, wondering if it would cost money, but even if it was a scam, he was willing to take the risk. A short while later, he had already registered, and Chu Guang just sent him the link to log in immediately. With that, he knew they now had a carpenter, and the question was, what was still missing? Then he saw in the chat that Mosquito was bragging about getting into the game, while some guy named Stop Smoking was mad because he had registered a long time ago. To calm everyone down, Chu Guang explained that they needed people with specific skills to test certain areas of the game. But Stop Smoking wouldn't stop spamming crying emojis, begging for a chance. Chu Guang started wondering if maybe he really did need a lot more players. Now that he had a weapon, hunting some beasts for food wasn't a problem, so he could afford to feed more people. That's when he realized that while they had food, they didn't have anyone to cook it, so it was time to find someone with that skill. However, when he mentioned this in the chat, everyone started claiming they could cook. The problem for our guy was that he needed someone truly skilled, not just someone who knew how to make instant noodles. Then a guy named Burger Piece sent a photo with a certificate, claiming that a renowned chef was now present. Right away, our boy made his choice. He swore he thought it would be a girl, not out of sexism, but because they needed both a woman and a cook, and that would be 2 in 1. Sometime later, Sev came running, saying he wanted to see him. He asked what was wrong, and the little robot revealed that he only had 1% battery left. For a moment, he relaxed, thinking it wasn't anything serious, until he realized that apparently he had no way to charge this guy. The little robot then explained that he had wireless charging, but he needed to be inside the storage room for it to work. Now Chu Guang understood how all those monitors were functioning. He picked up the little robot and told him not to worry, he would carry him. While climbing the stairs, Seb revealed that the base was powered by nuclear fusion. Our boy was shocked, but the little guy said that this type of power could last for a very long time. Now that Chu Guang had discovered the source of everything, he immediately wanted a way to steal it. But here came the Dan robot with the plot twist. There was a little problem. The base had been built so long ago that the energy could run out at any moment. Chu Guang asked when that would happen, but unfortunately, Sev had no idea. He explained that in theory, according to the original plan, the base should have been activated a century ago, not when he arrived. The good news was that they could find the part where the energy was distributed to the base and replace it. But Chu Guang didn't think that was such good news, especially since he had no idea where to find nuclear fusion energy. Shortly after arriving back at the base, he put Sev on the ground and told him to go recharge. The little robot waved goodbye, and Chu Guang started thinking that it must still have some energy left, considering the base had been delayed by 100 years before opening. It was probably running on some kind of conservation mode, which meant it might still have a few decades left. The problem that worried him the most right now was the cold, not to mention that he didn't have much time to prepare. Once outside, he got startled. The guys had already built 8 furnaces, and all of them were burning. For some reason, Good Time was kind of invisible in the scene, while Shadow said that he had finally shown up. Our boy praised them, and Shadow rushed over, saying that this was the work of everyone together. Chu Guang then told them they didn't mean to be so modest. They were all contributing really well. And as a reward for unlocking cement, everyone received 1,000 contribution points. On top of that, Shadow had been promoted to construction captain, earning another 1,000 points. He would give them the freedom to design the forward base outpost. Shadow immediately thanked him, saying he would do everything to rebuild their land. Meanwhile, someone else was wondering why only that damn guy kept getting extra rewards. Chu Guang then said that he wanted an explanation about their plans. Shadow saluted, standing there with a plunger-like face, saying, "Yes, sir." He then explained that after logging out of the game yesterday, he went to a real-life cement production site to do some research, and he discovered that cement would last longer if they added a bit of steel powder. He explained the process of combining rust with charcoal to create that powder. Then they could take the remaining powder and mix it with wood cement to make super cement. Of course, it was obvious that they couldn't produce much cement with just a few furnaces, so they needed to build a furnace made of cement to be able to make more cement. Yet, it made sense. Sort of. Chu Guang then asked about the next steps. Shadow said that first they needed to build a cement furnace that could reach extremely high temperatures, and then they could replace the wood-based cement. Man, he had never heard so much talk about cement in his life. Chu Guang thanked him and said he hoped everything would go according to plan. At that moment, everyone was surprised as he announced that some new people would be joining the team. He was planning to throw a little welcome party, a party that involved good food, so who was up for a hunt? The starving ones all raised their hands, but he replied that they didn't need that many people. Once again, he called on Wei, since his perception skill would make it easy to locate some beasts. Before heading out on the hunt, our guy had Wei take him to the place where they had found the mushrooms. Xu Guang took a look and said they were lucky it hadn't gone in too deep. Then he told them to leave because their target wasn't there today. Wei then asked why they were moving away from the forest if they were going out to hunt. That's when Xu Guang revealed that the forest in this world was a little different, and it was right ahead. Wei was startled, and before long they were in the suburbs. Surrounded by a bunch of buildings, Wei was terrified to see that in this world, the forest looked like this. And Xu Guang told him that from now on they had to be extremely careful. After the apocalypse, it was obvious that cities had become a paradise for fungi and plants, and little by little, animals had taken over the areas. With the radioactivity from the war and the contaminated soil, most of them had mutated. But Xu Guang warned that the danger here wasn't just the mutants. However, instead of being scared, Wei was super excited, eager to find something thrilling in this game. For once, he didn't let his imagination run wild, and Xu Guang told him to stay close. Suddenly, right in front of him, he heard a strange sound. He stopped for a second, and then told Wei that something was about to appear. His friend wanted to know what it was, and Xu Guang said that there were probably survivors nearby. First, Wei was scared, then he was curious, asking what the natives of this world were like. Once again, he was surprised that Wei hadn't thought about what the native girls might be like, and Xu Guang told him not to get too excited. This wasn't something to celebrate. In a place like this, strangers were far more dangerous than plants and mutants. Sometime later, near a car, Xu Guang was certain that there were some bandits around. The sulfuric residue on the metal proved that bombs had exploded there recently, and nobody places bombs near their own home, meaning they had to be bandits. He then asked Wei if he had heard any explosions to the east when he logged in. Wei answered that he hadn't. Xu Guang started walking away, telling him to wait, but Wei wanted to know what he was going to do. When Xu Guang said he was going ahead to investigate, his friend wanted to go with him. But Xu Guang just turned around and told him to stay put. Afraid of being forced to log out of the game, we just replied, "All right." He stayed hidden behind the little car while our boy moved toward the building. At first, he had called Wei to use him as a sort of decoy, but considering they were dealing with bandits and goblins, that would probably just complicate things. Eventually, though, they would be discovered anyway, since their base was right nearby with smoke rising from it. If he didn't deal with it soon, these risks would remain close by. If, for even a second, he thought the people around were a threat, he wouldn't hesitate to attack head-on. Some rats came toward him, but he simply dismissed them as foolish. He wiped out the whole rat family without even triggering an animation. While walking outside, he noticed something. Just ahead, there were some shacks with the lights on. He knew that in this apocalypse, there were two types of bases. Those built inside the ruins and those where people used everything around them. But only giant mutant humans could build 100% wooden bases, using nearly an entire tree. They ate anything from contaminated mushrooms to other people, rats, and cockroaches. And obviously their favorite nutrient was their former species. He kept watching until, as expected, he spotted a green figure in the distance. With a bow on its back and wearing human armor, that creature was a mutant sentry. If he and Wei had continued down the street, they would have been spotted by that guy and taken a barrage of arrows. The problem was that there were too many obstacles in the way and he couldn't get a clear view of their base. But judging by the number of bases, there were at least 20 or 30 of them. Compared to their own base, this was extremely dangerous. Right then, a mission popped up to eliminate the mutant tribe on 76th Street. Thinking about the size of those creatures, he knew it was insane and basically a death wish. But 200 points meant 2 weapons. One thing he had discovered was that he could unlock missions by walking around the world and interacting with certain things, which was strange since the system window only opened near the base, so how did this mission just pop up? He kept walking, but 200 points still weighed on his mind. We started following him, and our boy knew that bringing multiple players would earn a maximum of 100 points, but this one was far more profitable. Then Lauren asked what exactly he had seen to make him want to leave. Xu Guang revealed that it was a mutant human camp. The blonde wanted to take a look, but our boy warned that he would probably be cooked and eaten. Also, they only had one weapon, which meant they basically had just one person capable of fighting these guys. Now Wei was freaked out after learning that the mutants were eating humans in this game. Xu Guang warned that for now, it was best not to provoke these creatures, and they needed much more preparation. The obvious problem was that the creatures were extremely close. Later, back at the base, he glanced to the side and saw that the guys had made some limestone. He was excited about this because he knew that mixing it with cement would allow them to build a modern structure. The rest of the group showed up and asked what animals those were. Xu Guang said they were just 2 hyenas, which would feed them for several days, but he wanted to mention some good news and bad news. Shadow, being simple, just wanted to know the good news. Our boy said that in the northern region, there was a lot of construction material lying around. There was a ton of limestone there, perfect for building. Shadow was excited, saying this was great since he thought it would be hard to get something like that. But Good Time wanted to know the bad news. Xu Guang then revealed the mutant camp with 20 green creatures, where I warned them about the dangers, the creature's strength, size, and the fact that they ate people. Xu Guang warned that given their numbers, and the fact that the mutants were level 10, if they discovered the base, everyone would die. That's why no one could go near 76th Street or leave through the East Gate. The guys all saluted, saying they understood. Now Xu Guang's problem was how to prepare those 2 hyenas. He had eaten their meat several times, but it was always prepared by the city folks. He only ever bought it with tokens. All he knew was that he had to drain the creature's blood, but he had no idea what else to do. Then Yanfeng raised his hand and asked if he could have some of the hyena's blood. Our boy wanted to know why, and he said he needed it to test a few theories. Basically, that settled the question, and our boy handed him a hyena's foot, telling him to have fun. Feng was startled but thanked him, saying this would be useful. Meanwhile, the furnaces were working at full speed. A while later, Shadow informed our boy that the cement furnace was almost ready. Our boy congratulated him and said that once this stage was complete, everyone would earn contribution points. Shadow just thanked him and said he was going back to work. Chu Guang was starting to feel confident about assigning missions to these guys. At first, he thought he would have to lie to them, but it seemed like they were genuinely interested in rebuilding this filthy world. Maybe that made sense if you consider that many construction games were also popular. For our boy, this was the perfect situation since, in such a valuable place, he couldn't afford to hand out too many rewards. All he could do was make empty promises and hand out those so-called contribution points that didn't actually exist. But another day seemed to have ended and he returned to the base, wanting to check how things were going in the chat. As soon as Wei logged out, he was already talking about the new update introducing mutants. Some people didn't believe it since it wasn't on the official site, but most were convinced that now that there were mutants, more players would be recruited. Burger P and Mosquito were in the chat sending emojis saying they'd be joining in soon as well. Meanwhile, poor Stop Smoking was still crying about it. Chu Guang decided to check the forum, and of course, there was a post from Dear Good Time. The guy had posted about the furnaces they were building, the nearby constructions, and the team's hard work. A lot of people were getting interested in the game, which was great news for Chu Guang. He got up, stretched, and opened the system to complete missions and collect some loot boxes. The number of points he earned from the system was pretty low, so he opened some common loot boxes. Once again, he got an amazing 5 lollipops. Chu Guang wasn't sure if this was just bad luck or if the system was garbage, until he noticed something different. At least this time, there was a golden lollipop. There was actually a buff item called Chocolate-Flavored Lollipop, which increased strength by 10% for 10 hours. The poor guy almost cried tears of joy, saying it was the first time he had pulled something decent from this cursed box. But then he wondered, was it really possible for food to work like a drug? At least it lasted for 10 hours, which meant that in a fight against a mutant, this thing could actually change the odds of victory. Was it an amazing lollipop, or was the only thing not amazing the fact that he had to suck on a lollipop before a battle? He put it in his pocket after all. Having an ace up his sleeve wasn't a bad thing. The next morning, the team was back at work. In fact, they were already exhausted again. But Shadow raised his hammer because today they were working with limestone. Once it was crushed, they just had to mix it with clay and steel powder. Then they would throw all of that into the cement furnace they had built. Good Time used his extra agility to spin the stick and push in as much air as possible. Then he stopped, realizing something. How were they supposed to know when the temperature was right? Shadow admitted that he had no idea. His friend was frustrated, demanding to know why they had gone through all this trouble if they weren't even sure it would work. To which Shadow responded that in the apocalypse, you couldn't expect too much planning, you just had to put in maximum effort and make it happen. The poor guy was getting annoyed, thinking that ever since this bastard took over leadership, he had been acting like he owned the whole operation. But then he glanced around and realized where were Wei and Yanfeng. Chu Guang was leaving the base when he suddenly ran into the two of them and wondered what they were up to. Wei called out to him looking exhausted, and our boy immediately wanted to know where they had been. Yanfeng revealed that they had gone near the mutant camp. Of course, Chu Guang asked if he hadn't told everyone not to go near that place. Yanfeng apologized, saying he didn't do anything dangerous, just set up a few traps around the area. On top of that, they had filled a bucket with a bunch of those blood-sucking leech larvae. Chu Guang was disgusted and asked where they had even found those things. Besides, he knew they weren't edible. While they were full of protein, they carried parasites that were nearly impossible to remove. Yanfeng explained that they had put some blood in a bottle, and as soon as the leeches crawled inside, they couldn't get out. A few managed to break the bottle and escape, but that's how they had captured so many of them. Chu Guang praised the idea, saying it was actually pretty clever. Now he understood why Yanfeng had asked for a piece of animal meat yesterday. But then he asked what they planned to do with these creatures, because obviously they couldn't eat them. That's when Yanfeng revealed his plan to use them for fishing. That was something even our boy hadn't thought of. Yanfeng explained that when they passed by the lake, they had seen some birds catching fish from the water. Now that was an idea that impressed our boy. Fishing was way less risky than hunting. The problem was that he himself was a terrible fisherman. Even with professional equipment, he wouldn't be able to catch anything. On top of that, the fish in this world were obviously mutants, making them even harder to deal with. But this was exactly where these parasites might actually come in handy. He asked Yanfeng if he knew how to fish, to which he replied that he didn't, but he would make some traps. Our boy congratulated him and said he was looking forward to the results. With that, they went to set everything up while our boy now had to figure out a way to preserve the hyena meat. But that night, he had prepared the meat exactly how, in theory, the guys from Birdie Street did it. In theory, it was the right process to kill all the parasites, but when he took a sniff, it didn't seem right at all. The meat was supposed to be reddish with a slight shine on top and some seasoning stuck to it. But his was brown and smelled like rotten meat. Maybe he had used the wrong method, or maybe he didn't even know what the right one was. He sniffed it again and wondered how something that had been cooked could still smell this bad. Without hesitation, he tossed it out, convinced that there was no way to eat that. It would be perfect if he had a dehydrator, something he could get if he had more mushrooms to trade with Lidayu. But it was still only the second week of September, and it would be a while before that guy came back. All of this was irrelevant, though, because he needed to start stockpiling food immediately. And given the state of the base, a refrigerator was a distant luxury. For the next few days, they hunted during the day and cooked in the afternoon. Meanwhile, our boy kept studying, trying to figure out how to properly prepare this stuff. Obviously, it was still a disaster. At least the team was working hard, and every day he earned a few more points. Once again, he opened some loot boxes. At least this time, instead of lollipops, he got a bottle of soy sauce. The brand was suspicious, but he was sure that in this world it would taste way better than plain meat. For now, that was it. Everyone was gathered around the pot. White commented that eating the same thing every day was already bad enough, but now it was making him want to throw up. At first, it was tolerable because he was having fun in the game, but now he realized this was just miserable. His mouth could handle the meat and that old wheat. What couldn't handle it was the other end. Good Time tried to eat, saying that soon they'd get used to the taste and their stomachs would adapt too. But he was about to vomit, saying this stuff tasted like old fat. Grimy Singh Shadow said they first needed to find a way to remove that thick sauce to see if it would taste at least somewhat decent. He tried to hype them up, saying this was a real apocalypse experience, but no one was enthusiastic about that. Even Good Time was about ready to kill him, this guy who always seemed to defend the developers. Still, he did have a point. Salt was probably a luxury in this world, so once they had more money, they'd have access to it. Wei, however, was just wishing he could be a pay-to-win player so he could buy some decent food in the next update. Yanfeng then said that if they had better fishing traps, they'd be eating something different. But everyone fell silent since none of them were experts at making traps. Wei asked how the cement process was going, and Shadow, puffing out his chest, said they were getting close to success. His friend seemed skeptical, but he explained that he and Good Time weren't just making cement, they were also about to start producing some blocks. The only problem was that since they had no mold, their blocks looked more like sponges. Wei told them to make some molds, but Good Time said it wasn't that simple. To get perfectly shaped blocks, they needed someone with actual skills. It wasn't something just anyone could do. He admitted that the survival games he used to play didn't even compare to this one. In those, he could build an amazing house in 30 minutes. Disheartened, he said the truth was that this game was just way too hardcore. The two of them exchanged looks, realizing that, unfortunately, it was true. Yanfeng had been setting up countless traps over the past few days, but the fish in this world were tearing through them. Not to mention that, thanks to mutations, there didn't seem to be any dumb creatures left. He would throw bait just to watch the fish, somehow incomprehensibly, steal it and swim away without a care. The poor guy was fuming, saying that all the dozens of bait pieces he had prepared had already been devoured. Unfortunately, their only current option was to eat this tough, disgusting meat. Then Shadow mentioned that new players would be arriving soon. And of course, Good Time hoped for some females to brighten up the atmosphere. Wei said he was using his perception skill to detect that if there were a woman coming, she would be a very healthy one. But suddenly, something caught everyone's attention. Footsteps approached from behind, and they turned around, wondering if they were under attack by mutants. But no, it was just Chu Guang, saying it was time for introductions. These were the two newest members of the group, our dear chubby Burger P and the craftsman blacksmith Mosquito. Obviously, this was a harsh reality check for the guys who wanted to know why two more dudes had arrived. Chu Guang wondered why everyone in this place had such ridiculous names, but he told them to give a warm welcome. The guys started clapping, totally excited. Clearly, this was exactly what they had been waiting for. But then Burger P caught a scent and walked over to the cauldron. Both he and Mosquito stood there for a second, and suddenly recoiled in shock. The way the smell and heat rose from that pot was extremely realistic. The poor guys were drooling over it, completely unaware of the bomb that was inside, while Shadow asked about their attributes. Mosquito said he had agility skills. And Burger P, guess what? Had constitution. They were definitely going to pick on the chubby guy. He was about to ask about the food when White quickly handed him a bowl, saying it was a welcome ceremony for them. He placed it in Mosquito's hands, asking if he wanted to try some. Staring at it, Mosquito figured he was lucky this was a game because in real life, this would clearly be a deadly poison. With no other choice, he took a bite and was immediately impressed. Every sense, even taste, was way too realistic. The game description explained that it was realistic to the point where if he didn't eat, he would actually feel sick, which he thought was a problem because, in his opinion, games didn't need to be this realistic. Unless, of course, some girls joined and the realism could be cranked up. Burger P took a whiff and asked what exactly was in that stew. Shadow explained that it was just a simple meat stew. Obviously, the meat came from a two-headed hyena, which they weren't sure was actually a dog or a wolf, but it was definitely not normal. The chubby guy took a bite and immediately commented on how slimy it was. Apparently, they hadn't drained the blood properly. The others awkwardly admitted that they had tried their best, but weren't exactly skilled at this. Shadow then informed him that the better he was in the kitchen, the more valuable he would be to the administrator. That got Burger P fired up. He was determined to try cooking something. Meanwhile, Mosquito mentioned that he knew carpentry. Shadow practically screamed in excitement upon hearing those words. He immediately grabbed Mosquito by the shoulder, asking if it was true. Mosquito confirmed that he had worked with furniture his whole life. Without hesitation, the two dragged him away, saying they desperately needed someone with skilled hands to make molds. Strangely, Mosquito had actually been curious about trying the stew, but they warned him it was better not to eat too much and to leave the cooking to the chef. Burger P just stood there, watching the poor guy get dragged off, and he started wondering if the people in this game had some peculiar interests. He kept an eye on the other guys to see if they were normal. At that point, he was already muttering that this was taking way too long to reach a type of content he actually enjoyed. At that moment, Burger P was certain this guy did not enter the game like a normal person. Meanwhile, Mosquito took one look at the wood and immediately pointed out that their processing was terrible. Mushrooms would start growing on it any moment now. But Shadow was more impressed by the fact that in just 10 seconds, Mosquito had made a perfect mold without needing any instructions. Mosquito asked if that was enough. Shadow immediately hugged him, saying yes, this guy was going to be a huge help. It was time to get back to work, and they started pouring cement into the molds. With that, they were truly building a real wall, or in this case, a real furnace. Good Time, however, wasn't very confident, which annoyed Shadow, who told him to be more positive about their work and everything they had been doing. They stood there staring at the furnace. Good Time muttered that he was sure this wasn't going to work. He walked away and Shadow called after him, saying that if it didn't work, they'd just blow on it a bit more before logging out. A little while later, Mosquito had also completed what looked like the perfect trap. He explained that he had replaced the fragile, round structure with a cage made of actual steel bars, using only the materials they had on hand, of course. We cheered, saying that now they could finally catch what he had been after this whole time. For a second, I thought he meant a fish, but then I remembered who we were talking about, of course. That wasn't what he wanted to catch. The three of them set off for their first hunt while Chu Guang was still holding his meat over the fire. That was when Burger P appeared, asking what he was doing. Our boy had been waiting for this moment, knowing exactly what kind of background this guy had. He explained that he was trying to prepare smoked meat, and Burger P had arrived at just the right time. He placed his hands on the guy's shoulders and said that they were in a difficult situation. Not only did they need to store food for their current group, but also for more than 100 compatriots who would arrive before winter. That's why he needed the chubby guy's help. Burger P wasn't much of a cook, even though he was a chef. He was more of a kitchen manager. But obviously, he had enough experience. The problem was that he hadn't joined this game to work the same job he already had in real life. And that's when he realized the trap he had walked into when they were asking about skills on the forum. He asked if that was why he had been recruited. Chu Guang admitted that he had figured it out. He explained that he had been trying to smoke the meat and find ways to improve preservation. He knew the guy had experience with food and asked if he was doing it right. Burger P confirmed that he was a chef in real life, but at the end of the day, this was a game and games didn't follow all real-world rules. Our boy told him not to worry. All they wanted was a professional's opinion, so he just needed to test it out. Burger P still wasn't convinced but decided to take a closer look at how Chu Guang was preparing it. He examined it for a second and immediately realized there were so many things wrong that it would be easier to just point out what was right. Burger P then told our boy that first of all, you could only properly smoke meat in an enclosed space. Also, that stuff on top definitely didn't seem like the right seasoning. Chu Guang revealed that it was tobacco leaves. In a world where salt was an extremely rare resource, this was the only way to add a different flavor and also help with the smell. On top of that, tobacco contained substances that preserve meat well, so when placed on top, it helped keep the meat from spoiling. Burger P was completely confused. No one did things like this in real life. He knew that some aromatic ingredients could be used for preservation, but he was certain that using too much would make any food lethal and inedible. He then told our boy that yes, it was possible to smoke meat without salt, though the taste wouldn't be as good. He wasn't familiar with this wilder method, but he was sure it wasn't great for your health. Poor Chu Guang didn't even know that smoking meat without salt was an option. Burger P then explained that microorganisms needed moisture to survive inside the meat. Smoking meat was basically a way to dehydrate it to the point where microorganisms couldn't survive. Obviously, it would work much better and taste even better with salt. The kid was already drooling just thinking about it. He also explained that this process was much easier with lean meat than with fatty meat, obviously because of the moisture content in the fat. But none of that mattered if they couldn't properly isolate the meat from the air. At first, Chu Guang thought it didn't make sense for people to be spending so much money on tobacco leaves if they were really useless. He recalled everyone on Birdie Street using them, but this time, he decided to trust Burger P. He had brought these players in to see what they were capable of. As he walked away, the chubby guy stood there, confused about why he had been abandoned with the meat. But our boy left confident that he had solved another problem. Now he was also considering bringing in some female players to boost productivity. But with only the guys he had so far, there was no way they could rebuild the entire base before winter. That's when he heard someone cheering nearby, saying they had finally done it. Good Time and Shadow came running, telling him to come take a look. They had successfully produced cement silicate, which oddly enough had a somewhat human-like shape. But the two of them were hyped, excitedly saying that this would change everything. Good Time mentioned that since it was just a test, they didn't produce a large amount. But with the size of their furnace, they could definitely make at least a ton. Shadow even teared up, saying that while it wasn't professional grade, it would still get the job done. To reach the necessary temperature for this stuff to form, the two of them had spent hours spinning the sticks non-stop. Chu Guang praised them, saying they were doing an amazing job. With this peculiar cement silicate, they had taken a huge step toward completing the first phase of the plan. He awarded them 1,000 contribution points, and the poor fools were overjoyed. They were shouting in excitement, saying that hard work really did pay off. But Chu Guang was starting to realize that these guys were accumulating way too many points. This was going to cause inflation, with everyone in the base turning rich. Of course, there was an easy way to fix that: just charge an absurd amount for everything you offered them. He even imagined setting up a gacha system, where they could roll for a virtual waifu with a 5% chance. That's when Good Time snapped him out of it, saying there was something important to discuss. With cement secured, they needed more people to begin construction. Chu Guang asked how many, and Shadow immediately responded, at least 10, but the more, the better. At a minimum, they needed enough people to keep the cement furnace running all day. Soon, they would need to build another one, which meant at least 4 more people. On top of that, they needed workers to transport cement, pour it into molds, another 4. And a group focused on construction and actually build the base, another 8. Chu Guang was realizing that this guy was basically asking for an entire football team. The problem was that the base currently had enough food to feed 7 people for a week. If you brought more people, everyone would starve. On the other hand, winter was approaching fast and the base needed to be finished by then. He sighed and said, all right. He would ask the higher-ups to bring more people out of hibernation. His friends were already imagining a group full of intelligent people, and of course, some women. But at least Shadow was honest. He was just happy that more people would arrive so he could boss them around and do less work. Already picturing himself giving orders to everyone, he knew building a wall would be easy. Hearing that Chu Guang could request more players, he was now certain that this guy's identity was a bit too complex for an NPC. An NPC who could even ask the developers to bring in more players, that was kind of suspicious. He was starting to realize that this game felt a lot like a fantasy story. At the very least, this whole thing had to be running on some kind of futuristic supercomputer. There was no way an AI was generating all of this. He was convinced that the big names behind this project were watching, and that they, the beta testers, were going to become famous. Meanwhile, Shadow just stood there, watching his friend with a blank expression, completely unaware of what he was imagining. Meanwhile, Mosquito was wiping the sweat from his forehead, saying he had finally finished. A 100% wooden toilet, at least ensuring that no one would get hurt while using it. Not sure about anything else though, the smell was definitely going to stick to that thing. Burger P, who had barely arrived, was already emotional, saying that at least he wouldn't have to squat anymore. But then Yanfeng came running, saying he would be the first to use it. The guy seemed excited, saying the toilet was made for that very purpose. But strangely, Yanfeng hesitated. This thing was public, meaning everyone would be touching it. So he ran off, saying he preferred to do his business in the bushes. Burger P found it odd that this guy cared so much about hygiene in a game. Just then, he heard shouting nearby. Turning around, he saw smoke rising. Apparently, Wyatt had finally caught his first fish. Burger P stood there, jaw dropped, wondering what the hell was going on. But the kid came running, shouting for everyone to check out what he had just caught. He threw a giant fish on the ground, practically crying with joy, saying that after 3 days he had finally done it. Yanfeng was shocked that he had actually brought it back alone. And Wai immediately scolded him, saying he had to handle it alone since Yanfeng had run off to the bathroom. Feeling a little embarrassed, Yanfeng mumbled that he just preferred to go in the same spot every time. Burger P asked if it had really taken 3 days to catch, not to mention that the fish was already long dead. But the blondie snapped back, saying he had no idea how hard it was to catch one of these things. 3 days was actually fast. They had stood there, trembling in front of the traps. Both had wanted to give up, but they knew that, eventually, it would work. Then, at one moment, the rope had started moving. They had looked back, run toward the river, and started pulling, but the fish was already slipping away. Yanfeng had shouted for them to haul it in before it escaped. But when his sensor went off and he warned to be careful, he felt something strange. Just in time, he shoved his friend to the side as an eagle swooped down. They had to fight off a whole flock of birds just to finally pull the fish out of the water. The problem was that the thing was ridiculously strong and still thrashing around. Obviously, they had to finish it off before bringing it back. Yanfeng told Burger P to consider all the effort they had put in. He patted him on the shoulder, saying he was curious to see if this thing was even edible. Burger P, on the other hand, had cooked fish all his life, but this was the first time he had ever seen a catfish this size. The thing had to weigh at least 50 kilos. Wei asked if he was going to smoke it, but of course, the chubby guy refused. A creature with this much fat and mucus on its skin would be impossible to dehydrate. Yanfeng wanted to know what they were going to do with it. Then, Burger P said he would think of something. He knew that if they just threw it on the grill, it would crush whatever they had. A little while later, holding a ladle full of broth, he announced that this was the only thing he could cook with such a beast. A delicious mutant catfish soup. He handed it out, saying the only problem was that he didn't have any seasoning to mask the strong smell. But for Wei, who had been eating stale meat every day, this seemed like a blessing. Everyone immediately took a sip. They froze, looked at each other, and teared up. This was the first time they had eaten something that actually tasted normal in this world. Poor Chu Guang stood there, completely dejected. He had been cooking for these ungrateful bastards all this time, and now he was being completely overshadowed. A while later, it was 6 in the evening, and the team had gone to sleep. It was time for him to look for the next batch of players to bring in. On the site, an announcement stated that they were entering the second version of the alpha, with 24 slots opening up. Chu Guang already knew that the moment he sent this message, the group chat was going to explode. Stop Smoking and the other guy, Show Mercy, already knew what was coming. They were both hyped. But Recycler No One responded that this was crazy. There were already over 100 people trying to register. For Chu Guang, that was actually a good thing. It meant he could be highly selective. As always, the biggest issue was choosing players who actually wanted to play, not just those taking up space. So on the site, he made an announcement. They would be hosting a winter event, one that would be extremely cold and realistic. But anyone who logged in for at least 4 hours a day would receive a special achievement. At that moment, there were 113 people interested in joining, which was strange considering there weren't that many people in the group. He knew these weren't duplicate accounts because the game had technology to prevent that. No matter how much someone tried to fake their identity, the moment they entered the game, their face would be the same. So he decided to check outside the game. Stop Smoking was in the chat, as always, talking with some girl named Helena and a few others. The girls were all interested, but Stop Smoking kept insisting that the game was fake so no one else would register, improving his own chances. At that moment, Chu Guang was ready to strangle this bastard for scaring people away. After some digging, he finally figured out where all these new people had come from. The game's website had been shared in other gaming communities. Since very few people had access to it, everyone was desperate to get in, purely for the exclusivity. Chu Guang was starting to realize that his strategy of keeping the player base exclusive was actually attracting even more people. The problem was that the forums were turning into a mess, and maybe it was time to appoint an admin. He saw that there were currently 99 people in the chat and decided to check what was going on. As always, there were tons of people eager to join the game, and Stop Smoking was still there, telling them to give up. Now Chu Guang was tired of this guy and seriously wanted to strangle him. But before he could do anything, he noticed that Good Time had sent him a private message. The self-proclaimed professional runner was excited that Chu Guang had finally replied and asked what was up. Good Time then said he wanted to know more about the NPCs in the game. He had a feeling that they were controlled by someone and wanted to know if Chu Guang had any insights. Chu Guang had no problem answering and told him to go ahead and ask. Good Time, now even more curious, pressed on. But instead of giving a straight answer, Chu Guang made up an elaborate lie. He said that the existence of that NPC was something very special. The player, now realizing he was uncovering some game secrets, asked him to be a little more specific. So Chu Guang, keeping up the act, said that it was the first generation of a perfect artificial intelligence developed by the company. The poor guy was completely stunned. He had no idea AI had come this far. But at the same time, he was impressed and excited, saying that the future had finally arrived. Chu Guang continued spinning his tale, claiming that it was the first AI ever given personality, memory, and independent thought. Now Good Time was convinced. He always knew something was off. That explained why the NPC's decisions affected progress and why it reacted so naturally. Considering how immersive and realistic the game was, it was actually believable. Everything finally made sense. Even someone as detail-oriented as him hadn't found a single bug in this game. The only real flaw was that there was only one NPC, which made him wonder, was the purpose of the game to test its mechanics or to test this AI's capabilities? Good Time was buzzing with excitement, sure that he had cracked the game's biggest secret. And that was also why the winter expansion was coming. He spammed messages to Chu Guang, eagerly awaiting his response. Meanwhile, Chu Guang had already realized that this guy wasn't all there. The fool was thrilled, noticing that Chu Guang was taking a while to reply. So to feed into his delusions, he finally answered, "Yes, you're right. The expansion is meant to test the AI's capabilities." Good Time was ecstatic, and Chu Guang was officially done talking to him. He had just witnessed the legendary state of player delusion. Leaving the chat, he walked up to a few capsules containing female players. It was time for the new recruits to enter the game. The next day, he told everyone that the temperature was dropping daily. This year's winter would be the coldest ever, so they needed to prepare better than ever before. Every minute and every second had to be used wisely, because once the cold wave hit, everything would become much harder. That's why he had updated all the missions on the list, and everyone needed to work together to survive this. Winter was coming, and it was worse than Game of Thrones. With those words, the whole crew got fired up and went back to hard work. The cold creeping in each day felt like a warning sign. They hadn't stockpiled enough food, especially considering that he wanted to raise their numbers to 30. That's why they were hunting every single day. A key player in this was Wei, whose perception skill allowed him to easily track down hyenas. The one suffering from this, however, was Burger P, who now had a mountain of carcasses to smoke. Meanwhile, Wei had finally leveled up to level 1, which allowed him to detect even more enemies. He was beyond excited, saying that he had leveled up despite doing practically nothing. For some reason, it only now hit me. This guy was basically Joey from Yu-Gi-Oh! At the same time, Chu Guang noticed that he was about to level up himself. But since he had the GM class, he had no idea how things worked for him. Steps showed that his development progress had reached 52% and was slowly increasing. As always, Shadow and Good Time were highly motivated to produce and improve cement quality. It was a tough job, not just making the cement but also hauling it around. But thanks to their efforts, Shadow leveled up to 2 and Good Time reached level 1. Something else he discovered was that while players could gain levels by doing a lot, they could also lose levels by doing nothing. The only poor soul who hadn't leveled up at all was Feng. He had caught tons of fish and was at 99% experience, but he just couldn't break through. On top of that, catching fish gave way less experience than actually killing them. Meanwhile, Mosquito and our dear Burger P weren't slowing down either. Mosquito was constantly fixing traps. On top of that, he was building a small house. Apparently, he wanted to turn it into some kind of chemistry lab, and he was stockpiling a bunch of bottles. Chu Guang wasn't sure if that was safe, but he wasn't going to interfere too much. Hopefully, the guy wouldn't blow himself up. While Mosquito was creative, Burger P was more of a jack of all trades. He was always cooking, never stopping for a second. Obviously, his main task was smoking meat. Since they didn't have any seasonings, the only way was to remove the skin and put the meat in the furnace to dry. Once winter arrived, they would pack everything into plastic bags and bury it in the snow. Obviously, the only problem was that the taste and smell were nothing to get excited about. Also, the animal hides were being processed into leather. They wouldn't have stylish clothes, but at least they'd have something warm. They were using a mixture Shadow had created to soak the fabric before letting it dry. The problem was that Burger P went up to our boy and said the workload was too much for him. Without an assistant, it was impossible. He was eyeing Wei after all. All he saw was the kid going out hunting with our boy, but the rest of the time, he seemed to be doing nothing. But Wei quickly defended himself, saying he was hunting like crazy. And obviously, he didn't want to stop because every time he located a beast and Chu Guang killed it, he still earned experience. Burger P was fuming at that smug grin, but Chu Guang backed him up, saying that unfortunately, he needed Wei for his perception skill. However, he promised that more people would be arriving soon to lighten the load. At this point, Yunai was starting to think those people were taking too long. Burger P sighed and said he could handle making leather, but he had no idea how to turn it into actual clothes. Chu Guang just smiled. That problem was already solved. Apparently, the first woman in this world was about to arrive. He put a hand on Burger P's shoulder and told him not to worry. He was bringing in the perfect person for the job. Of course, the issue was that even if he wanted to find one player for each role, that was impossible since they were all just a bunch of students. Not to mention, he prioritized players who seemed the most motivated. For our boy, this was like farming. If he planted the right players soon enough, he'd harvest all the skills he needed. Then, on September 12th, someone announced that the servers were finally opening. A player sat down, put on his headset, and following the instructions, closed his eyes. His nickname was Show Mercy, and his real name was Du Mingdao. The next second, he opened his eyes, found himself in front of a blue light, and then woke up inside a capsule. He stepped out, looking around, wondering if this was really the game everyone had been talking about. Looking at his hands, he realized how realistic the cold felt after stepping out of the water. There was also a strange rotten smell. Turning to the side, he saw a giant creature staring at him. Neither of them spoke. Then he screamed, demanding to know what the hell this thing was. But the big guy remained calm. It was Recycler No, one who had chosen the Mutant Lizardman class. Mingdao recognized him from the chat and immediately pointed out how ugly his character was. But the Lizardman snapped back, saying that Mingdao was the ugly one, until he looked down at his own hands. That's when he realized he had a tail, and more importantly, that he was missing a certain important part. Mingdao shrugged, saying that wasn't such a big deal since it's not like he could do anything in this form anyway. The poor guy was frustrated, saying that if the game was going to take something away, it should have at least made him a female lizardman. Mingdao found his preferences a little peculiar. His friend told him to shut up. He turned to the capsule, remembering that the site had said character attributes would be similar to real life. But obviously, he wasn't actually a lizardman in real life. At least his stats were higher overall, except for intelligence, which was abysmally low. He knew that 5 was the standard attribute for a normal human. Aside from his embarrassingly low intelligence, the rest of his stats were far beyond average, meaning he was basically immortal. He quickly did some simple math in his head, reassured himself that he wasn't dumb, and started laughing. Mingdao was confused by his sudden happiness, but the lizardman just told him to hurry up. They had to meet the other players and the administrator. He marched forward, laughing until Mingdao pointed out that something was stuck to his butt. The lizardman pulled off the piece of paper, confused since he had just gotten out of the capsule. Apparently, it had been stuck to him from the start, but he had no idea what was written on it. As they stepped outside, the area was packed with players. The moment they saw the lizardman, they all stopped and stared. Everyone was curious, wanting to get a closer look, wondering how he had unlocked his secret class. Mingdao threw an arm over his friend's shoulder, telling him not to worry, he had his back. But the lizardman shoved him away, saying that his lizard stink was unbearable. Looking around, Mingdao realized that so far his friend was the only one with a different race. Just as he had heard, each player had a specific base attribute. Then he noticed something unexpected. He never thought he'd see this in the game. Two girls had arrived. The guy just logged in and was already love-struck, eyes glued to the tall one and her friend. The problem was that the two seemed to be arguing, and he didn't want to get caught up in a fight between women. The tall girl told the pink-haired one that she still had to be a teenager to be that skinny. But the pink-haired girl had butted her chin, saying she was sure that in real life, the tall girl was actually shorter. Then we jumped back to 10 minutes earlier, when she had woken up and stepped out of the capsule. Her name was Wisteria, and she had an intelligence-based build. Like everyone else, the moment she got out and looked around, she was stunned by how realistic everything was. Wisteria was already imagining how cool it would be to equip the cybernetic items mentioned on the website. She ran to the door and was shocked to see that the place was massive and already filled with players. Then something caught her eye, a tall female player who had to be at least 1.78 meters. Wisteria walked over and introduced herself, saying it was good for them to meet since they seemed to be only two women here. The tall one, who had a perception-based skill, introduced herself as Crowley. Suddenly, Wisteria froze and Crowley asked what was wrong. She glanced around and then pointed out that everyone was wearing the same jacket. Crowley agreed, saying it was probably some kind of default beginner's outfit, but Wisteria, just by touching it, could tell that the material was not ordinary. It felt like it had a layer capable of insulating against heat, cold, and even wind. It was far more advanced than any fabric she had ever seen. Then she noticed a yellow cord on the side of the outfit and wondered what it was. When she pulled it, the suit compressed, tightening all over her body. Her outfit vacuum sealed itself, and she suddenly felt a little awkward seeing that nothing was left up front. That's when Crowley started laughing. What was this, huh? She was laughing at her friend just because she was underdeveloped. Obviously, Wisteria noticed this and got mad, saying that the closer she got to Crowley, the dumber she seemed. But Crowley just kept laughing, asking if she looked like that in real life too. One pull of that device and the suit went into vacuum-packed mode, and now she was all set on humiliating her poor, flat-chested friend. The two of them kept trading insults while Mingdao watched from a distance. Meanwhile, some of the guys were daring each other to punch each other in the face to see if the game was truly 100% realistic. The poor guy was already questioning whether he had entered a game or an asylum. Then Chu Guang appeared and told everyone to shut up. The players turned around excited, grinning. Finally, the legendary NPC had arrived. It might have been Mingdao's first time in the game, but he never missed a single one of Good Times forum posts. Chu Guang welcomed everyone to Area 404. He was the administrator here, known as Don. For a moment, everyone got serious and focused. Our boy was about to say something, but then he suddenly flinched. There was a mutant standing behind the group. Even though it looked somewhat intimidating, just from its dumb expression, he could tell it was a player. Of course, he had to be careful about outsiders disguising themselves as players. After all, if it was a player, he had the command to ban them, which made things way easier. He decided he'd deal with the lizard situation later and told everyone that he had some good news to share. The war had ended, but at the same time had left the entire world in ruins. Now 200 years after the apocalypse, only a few had survived and times were tough. Anyone standing here was extremely lucky to have the chance to rebuild this planet. He then introduced Sev and told them that any questions about this world or this place should be directed to him. Obviously, Chu Guang had practiced this speech thoroughly to make sure he said the exact same thing every time, avoiding inconsistencies for players. He also showed them the resident rulebook. Anyone living here had to follow the laws. Breaking them could lead to hibernation, confinement, or in extreme cases, permanent expulsion. Some of the players were a little startled by that, and Crowley muttered that this NPC had way too much power. But this was the only way for Chu Guang to ensure that everyone obeyed him. The rules weren't anything crazy, just things like not fighting other players and not destroying property. He had reviewed player suggestions on the forums and adjusted accordingly. The goal was simply to ensure that players didn't ruin each other's experiences. Obviously, if Shadow, for example, tried to force people to work, he would be jailed. After explaining the important details, he took the 24 new players outside to introduce them to the surface. As soon as they stepped out, everyone was blown away by the sheer scale and realism of the world. Chu Guang was eager to show them the true reality of this game. After going over a few more rules and explaining how everything worked, he handed the group over to Shadow, who had been waiting anxiously. Some were assigned to move blocks, while others were tasked with repairing walls. Most of the men, obviously, were put to work in construction. Even though they weren't entirely sure what contribution points could be used for yet, they were all eager to earn them. Of course, some were learning how to use fire, hunt, set traps, and other survival skills. Crowley, on the other hand, was focused on gathering to improve her perception skill. On top of that, she had a toxin intuition ability that let her detect any poison present in herbs. Of course, it was only intuition. If she actually touched the poison, she'd still die like anyone else. However, she did develop resistance to toxins faster than everyone else, making her the perfect candidate for collecting materials. Now it was time to figure out what to do with the big lizard. Shu Guang remembered that this guy was Recycler No, one from the chat. The lizardman greeted him, assuring him that he could be trusted. It was really him. That's when Recycler remembered the paper he had received when he woke up and handed it over. The thing reeked, and Shu Guang noticed it was damp, but it seemed to be some kind of waterproof paper since, apparently, it had come out of the capsule. Just to confirm, he asked where exactly this had been. Recycler casually replied, "On my butt." Poor Shu Guang, he wasn't ready for that. The lizard tried to explain that it had been stuck there, but he had removed it as soon as he woke up. Shu Guang sighed and said it was fine. Then he tried to read it. The message came from whoever had created this base, apologizing and explaining that this genetic mutation was technically an accident. However, since it had happened on its own, they could call it natural evolution. So good luck. Shu Guang immediately realized that the person was just making excuses, but he still wanted to check Recycler's stats. When he opened them, he was shocked by what he saw. The guy had just spawned and already had nearly the same strength as Shu Guang, who was level 5. On top of that, most of his talents were combat-focused. Of course, there were also some debuffs. He gained less experience, felt the cold more intensely, and was dumb as a rock. But looking at the massive unit in front of him, Shu Guang was certain this guy would be useful. So he immediately told him that starting today, he would be joining the hunting team. The lizard roared with excitement, eager to experience it. Shu Guang told him to wait by the sanatorium exit while he took care of some things. Recycler, now acting all cute, responded, "I'll be waiting for you, boss." Then he happily hopped away. At that moment, Shu Guang noticed something strange nearby. He turned and asked why her outfit was so tight. Obviously, it was Wisteria, and he wanted to know what had happened. She explained that she hadn't done anything. This was exactly how the suit was when she stepped out of the capsule. She pointed at the yellow cord and told him to pull it. When he did, the suit vacuum sealed itself to his body, and he was stunned. He had been in this world all this time and never noticed this feature. The transformation made the clothing lighter and way more flexible. Then he saw Wisteria still standing there and remembered that he needed to assign her a mission. Her intelligence stat was a bit higher than her other attributes. She also had a talent that let her memorize things more easily and gain extra experience from repetitive tasks. Shu Guang recalled that she had been a seamstress in real life and realized that this talent suited her perfectly. He asked her if she knew how to make clothes. She replied that if she had the materials, she could. Most of her work had been designing on a computer, but she also had plenty of experience actually making clothes. Shu Guang told her that in that case, they'd find the materials she needed. A little while later, he placed her in front of a massive pile of leather and asked if it was enough. Wisteria lit up with excitement. She had no idea what kind of animal this came from, but based on the texture and quality, she was sure this was expensive stuff. She was practically bouncing with excitement, asking if she could start working with it. Shu Guang told her to go ahead. The leather had been processed by his head chef, but unfortunately, he didn't know how to turn it into clothes. She proudly pounded her chest and said, "That's a problem I can solve." She just needed to know what style he wanted. Shu Guang said he didn't care about style as long as the clothes were warm. However, he warned her that a sewing machine was impossible. At best, they had scissors and needles. Wisteria reassured him that if all they needed was warm clothing, those tools were more than enough. The guy was already thrilled. Another hard worker had arrived. He told her she could start as soon as he handed over all the materials. Meanwhile, he reminded himself that he'd have to go hunting for deer soon. Seb was left in charge of giving out missions and organizing the rest of the players. Since Shu Guang didn't have much else to offer them, as always, he rewarded them with contribution points. Even Wisteria would earn 50 points for each piece of clothing she made. Once things advanced, he was thinking about setting up a store where players could spend their contribution points, essentially creating an in-game economy. Of course, he would need someone to run the shop, but it would have to be an NPC, not a player. That's when he remembered the slaves being sold on Birdie Street. Maybe that was an option. Meanwhile, Recycler was getting impatient. "When are we going hunting?" Shu Guang told him not to rush. First, they needed to find a proper weapon for him. By now, the team had built a wooden house nearby. Naturally, it was 100% made by Mosquito. The poor guy was overworked, handling tons of things that should have been made with different materials, but were instead being done with wood. The tiny amount of metal they had was used for making blades. Most of the weapons were wooden. For example, the crossbow used as little metal as possible and had a hyena tendon for the string. Shu Guang had a rifle, but ammo was extremely rare, so he was obviously saving it. Recycler reached for the crossbow, but Shu Guang smacked his hand away. Then he handed him something else. "This is what you're gonna fight with." There were a few spears that had been modified specifically for throwing. Shu Guang was sure that since this guy had so much strength, he'd be able to kill from a distance just by throwing them. No way in hell was a beast this size going to be hiding in the back with a crossbow. He handed Recycler the spear and told him to get familiar with it. This was the perfect weapon, capable of both close and long-range combat. On the first day, they would focus on improving his hunting skills so that in the future, he could be the one saving our boy. Recycler was convinced that this was some kind of secret mission, one only he had unlocked. Then, out of nowhere, the two of them were startled by something. They turned it around. It was Mosquito, carrying 2 vials. Looks like he had finally figured out how to develop acetone. He quickly explains that with this acetone, they can basically make a type of gunpowder. The lizard and our boy are scared while the mosquito smiles. He says that everything works fine with this gunpowder until the moment it comes into contact with fire. But it's only then that he notices there was a lizard standing in front of them. Our guy introduces him, and somewhat awkwardly, the mosquito welcomes him. Meanwhile, he's dying of anger because this bastard showed up with a secret profession. Guang asks him to explain, and he demonstrates the entire wood distillation process. He extracts the liquids, pours them into the setup, lets them settle. They get trapped there, come out as vinegar water, and it's ready. Now they just needed to mix that with hydrogen peroxide to make a type of explosive. The lizard is afraid to ask what this guy does in real life. Meanwhile, Guang thinks that only in a game would someone have the audacity to do something like this. Guang simply asks if, to sum it all up, he still can't make the explosive. Mosquito says yes, but in a few days, he's sure he'll be able to. Besides, they didn't need a high-quality explosive to have a destructive effect. For example, just with this ketone he made, if they soaked a base in it, it would create a fire that would take a long time to put out. Mingdao immediately realizes that this is basically the principle of a Molotov cocktail and knows it will be very useful. He asks if the guy tested it, to which he replies that he's afraid to because there are trees everywhere and it could start a massive fire. Mingdao says that's fine and that they'll take it to test later. With that, he gives him 1,000 contribution points and the guy gets all excited. However, Guang tells him to start being careful and not blow up the entire base. He also asks Mosquito to talk with the rest of the base. That's because there could be other people who also knew some chemistry secrets. For example, the same ketone used to make gunpowder could also be used as a detergent. Our boy made sure to praise him so that everyone would know Mosquito had done something incredible, hoping it would motivate more players. But in reality, while he was feeling proud of himself, the others just got annoyed, especially considering that the guy even made it to the site's Hall of Fame for creating acetic acid. Unfortunately, since our boy is poor and can't give out items, the only thing he can use for leverage is these achievements and the Hall of Fame. With all the players working and motivated, it was time for him to go hunting. The industrial area is far away and spreads across an entire region. Meanwhile, the northern part of the park is much more compact. Aside from education, schools, and housing, this area has almost no industrial zones. Not to mention it's one of the areas most overtaken by the forest. Additionally, he saw in the world's history that this place specifically was never bombed. However, the excess of refugees created internal competition for resources. Seeing that food had already become a problem, they closed the doors and trapped everyone who was outside. A bunch of bullet holes and bones on the ground proved that the ending there was anything but peaceful. Wei was startled when he saw there was even a tiny skeleton in the trash. He walked away all crook, saying that this game was way more realistic than he had imagined. Guang tells him to get used to it because this is a post-apocalyptic world. Guang seems to be looking around to see if there are any leftover resources. But Wei is discouraged, thinking that these places must have been looted at least 10 times after the apocalypse, until our guy says he found exactly what he was looking for. Inside a clothing store, there was a perfect little sewing kit, just right for a certain someone. When he tells the guys it's time to go hunting, suddenly, they hear gunshots. Our boy hides against the wall, and the other two quickly follow behind him. On the ground, the bodies of some survivors lie still, while the group approaches. Guang immediately recognizes them as the Apocalypse Raiders. The guys stand there, and Guang starts trembling. Wei asks what's going on, but in that instant, our boy covers his mouth. Out of nowhere, the dog from the group head turns around. Our boy realizes that this damn beast must have some kind of heightened perception as well. Man, the dog barked and the guys immediately opened fire. What the hell? Do they have ammo to spare? However, Guang noticed something strange. The enemy's bullets were dropping to the ground before hitting the wall, which showed that they were probably using homemade weapons. One of the scavengers didn't even get the chance to check if it was a human or a mutant. Wei tells them not to worry because he has perception, but our boy orders both of them to shut up and look. There was ammo at his feet. The raiders were armed, had yen, and were far more experienced than everyone there. For now, the two of them needed to go back, and soon enough, our boy would join them. However, the lizard and we didn't want to leave. They insisted that they had more people, and besides, the raiders were just humans, so they could win easily. Wade was excited, telling them to count on him because he could fight. They had a crossbow, a spear, a Molotov, and on top of that, a giant lizard. Suddenly, Guang seemed to process the information. He was so used to running away that he hadn't even considered that they might actually have a chance to win. Since he always explores alone, he's used to seeing danger and fleeing, but now he had comrades by his side. With the advantage of numbers and the lizard's size, they really did have a shot. Not feeling pumped, he said that this time they were going to handle it. He gave Wei instructions on where to throw the Molotov, and told him to light and toss it as soon as he heard gunfire. However, Wei was worried because he would have to run across open ground, so he asked how he was supposed to do that. Guang said it was obvious, just run. He didn't need to worry since their weapons had short range and wouldn't do that much damage. The boy didn't seem too thrilled about this plan, but he knew it was the perfect chance to impress the administrator. With that, he gathered his courage and dashed across the open field. As the raiders fired, they shouted that if he surrendered, they might spare his life. However, Wang had already managed to take cover on the other side of the wall. The raiders exchanged glances, certain that this kid didn't have any weapons and had only come to scavenge, so taking him down would be easy. They immediately released the hyena, which charged straight at Wei. But just as it was about to bite, a loud gunshot rang out and the beast was sent rolling far away. "Damn, looks like our boy is carrying a freaking hand cannon." One of the raiders yelled that he was going to skin him alive, but his companion warned him to be careful. They weren't alone. Before they could react, the Molotov landed right at their feet and exploded. They thought about retreating, but it was too late. The lizard was already closing in. Man, our dear Du Mingdao doesn't hesitate one bit. Before the bald guy could even say anything, first blood. Meanwhile, in the construction area, the walls were rising and everyone was working hard. The furnaces were running at full capacity and cement production wasn't stopping. Our boy arrived and Good Time immediately approached him. However, our guy wanted to know why the two of them were standing around while everyone else was working. Good Time explained that he had left Monster and Mercy in charge of construction since one of them was a civil engineer. Meanwhile, he and Shadow were planning metal production. Our guy asked how things were going with Feng, and they explained that the traps had improved and that he was catching a lot of fish. The ones that could be dried were all being delivered to Burger P, who as always was smoking them. The only issue was that Feng was avoiding placing the traps too deep in the water because whenever he did, massive fish would show up. Guang said that was fine. The important thing was that they were learning, and it was good to know that everyone was working. With that, he told them to continue researching metal production and moved on. As he walked through the base, he noticed that even the new players seemed motivated, which was perfect. Most likely, these people worked desk jobs in real life, so being able to do physical labor and live like this was exciting for them. The adventurers were all celebrating the chance to do something extremely out of the ordinary. Meanwhile, Mingdao, who had been an engineer for a long time, was already used to this, but here, he was treated like a hero. Skills that were considered common in the real world were treated as gold in this place. And thanks to everyone's efforts, the wall was beginning to rise. He was really building the base. The drive to surpass oneself and achieve goals is at the top of human needs. Additionally, one of the advantages here was that they could push themselves to exhaustion and then return to the real world completely fine. Now with 30 players and 152 registered members, he knew he wouldn't have to worry about newcomers for a while. You could say that people outside would be fighting forever just to get a helmet. Sometime later, he informed the hunting team that they would be organizing the loot from their latest hunt. What they had stolen from those raiders wasn't a small amount. They even brought the raiders' hyena back to turn it into food. Wei took a look and found some dried meat, a compass, and some strange tokens. As he examined the token, trying to read what was written on it, Wang immediately appeared and told him to hand it over. It was useful. Besides, eating the raiders' meat wasn't a good idea since those guys usually didn't care much about what they ate. You never know if that came from someone of your own species. And at that moment, Wei gets startled and says he's definitely not eating it. Our friend then asks how he feels about killing a person. The scavenger lizard says he didn't feel anything. It was just like killing a character in a game. He even finds it strange that the guy asked since he's played much more violent games before, so it felt pretty normal to him. The only difference was that when the spear struck the target and blood splattered on him, he felt a biological instinct, a sudden craving to eat. Wang is impressed that these guys don't seem affected at all by taking a life. Maybe the fact that they all believe this is a game really works. There's also the possibility that the helmet is regulating their emotions in a different way, but that's something he'll never truly know. By 5 p.m., the wall was already repaired. Wang is starting to wonder if he's becoming useless in this place. Cement production was now so high that they were beginning to stockpile it. Of course, once it hardened, it couldn't be used for molding anymore, but in bags they could be stacked anywhere to form barricades. On top of that, the guys dug a massive hole, built a wooden structure, and poured cement over it, basically constructing a solid foundation. Behind the barrier, they planned to use those bags to build a staircase so they could shoot while staying in cover. This first line of walls in reality would eventually become the last as they planned to expand their defenses further and further outward. Another tip for Mingdao was to start cutting down all the surrounding trees. This place was basically an open forest, and clearing it would allow them to see anyone approaching. Shadow praised him and asked what he did in real life. Mingdao replied that he worked in engineering, but his job was so uneventful that he couldn't even be productive. Shadow pointed out that in the game it was completely different considering everything they had accomplished in just one day. A while later, as usual, it was fish suit time. But for the guys who had never eaten in the game before, this was a real treat. Except for Wisteria, who complained that the fish tasted too much like fish. Burger P told her to get used to it since there were no seasonings in this game, and he was already doing his best. Of course, Wei immediately chimed in, saying that if she wanted, he could pinch her nose so she wouldn't smell it. At that moment, Guang and Feng arrived, and the guys excitedly called them over to eat. However, they quickly noticed that the two didn't seem very cheerful and asked what was wrong. Feng revealed that they had just learned someone had died. The group was shocked since this had never happened before. Shadow found it odd, saying that so far it had been really hard to lose enough life to even get close to death. Guang hadn't expected the first person to die would be someone outside of combat. Damn, Crowley, with all her health, was the first to die. He had sent her to a cave full of edible mushrooms, but apparently she had disappeared since then. The logs showed that she had ended up in the mutant leech den and was most likely killed. Unlike the larva Feng used for fishing, an evolved leech could completely dissolve a human body in just a few minutes. There was no point in trying to retrieve her. There wouldn't even be bones left. He then told everyone that it was time to sleep and prepare for the next day. With that, Guang guided the group to the capsules and logged them out of the game. Lately, he had been wanting to use the substance extractor, but the base had no power for it. The capsules could draw energy, but they didn't come with a handy little outlet for him to use. He knew that whoever designed all this had made sure he couldn't siphon electricity, so he asked Sev how the capsules that create players actually worked. Sev explained that there was a kind of storage unit that held player data, which was then dropped into a tank when they were brought into the game. Guang then asked if it was possible to swap one tank for another. The robot said that maybe, but that would basically be stealing. However, our boy explained that for now, he couldn't even use this thing since he didn't have a generator. The most important thing was reviving the dead by using the leftover substances they had. He had so many idle capsules that would be perfect for that. Sev, however, warned that it was risky. He might end up using everything they had. But Chu Guang insisted that they should solve the current problems first and think about the future later. At the same time, he knew he would have to create a death penalty to make these people less reckless. Maybe it would even be better to set up a level barrier so that beginners couldn't wander off and end up dying. The problem was how to let players like Crowley, who relied on perception, actually develop, since they needed to explore. Not to mention, she was a beginner with 0 contribution points, so there was nothing he could do for her. But if he didn't enforce some kind of punishment, people would just accumulate negative contribution. So he decided that the penalty would be assigning them the most tedious jobs. On top of that, he could also increase the respawn cooldown time. As Sev settled into the chair, Guang thought about how full the day had been. As the one managing inventory, every day he had to log everything they received. The problem is that the more people there are, the more items come in and go out. Today, they managed to produce 45 kilograms of meat, but they lost 10 kilograms just from people eating. He's starting to realize that he won't be able to keep managing these numbers alone. He'll have to call someone to do it. He then explains that at first, everyone will only be able to earn contribution points by doing simple tasks so that they don't take unnecessary risks. This will only be different for people with skills that allow them to do more productive work. After a day of hard work, it was time to claim the points. This time, the boy managed to earn 17, and here he goes again, pulling 17 trash loot boxes. No way. Ah no. This time, he decides to take 1 intermediate box and 7 basic ones. The box opens, smoke comes out, and he receives what looks like 3 super lollipops, 2 regular lollipops, 2 fruit items, and some kind of medical supply. The intermediate box contained a nano-healing needle that could enhance a person's healing abilities. The only problem, as always, was that there were no instructions for use, and he had no idea about side effects. Once again, the majority of the loot turned out to be just a bunch of lollipops. But this time, he also got a Kit Kat, and even some canned meat. He figured the chocolate was probably still good, but with canned food this old, he wasn't so sure. Considering when canned food was made in this world, it had to be around 400 years old, older than many relics. But it was fine since he could just hand it to a player to test. He then sat down and checked the forum, and right there was Crowley apologizing, saying she didn't mean to die like that and begging not to be banned. He found it strange that she was afraid of being banned and decided to check what had happened. He concluded that the real problem was the toxin-related talent she had received. Wherever she walked, it glowed green, and she kept feeling the urge to experiment. He suspected she had died from eating too much of something. She then explained that she had easily filled buckets and buckets with edible mushrooms. However, during her search, she found a sewer, and upon entering saw a bunch of glowing things. Curious about why so much was growing there, she ventured deeper into the cave. But before she could react, a creature had already swallowed her head. She couldn't feel any pain, but she was startled and woke up in the real world scared. And when she tried to log back in, her account was restricted. Wang realized that she had just been messing around and now was mad about getting banned. A bunch of people in the chat were flaming her, telling her to give up her slot if she didn't know how to play. So Guang explained that it took 72 hours to return to the game after dying. But poor Crowley, desperate, still wanted to come back and asked him to name a price she was willing to pay. However, our boy revealed that it was impossible, no matter how much money she offered. She then sent a crying cat emoji asking if he couldn't make an exception. But he simply said no rules were rules. On top of that, she lost 500 contribution points. Now in the negative, she would have to do some forced labor before being allowed to leave the base again. Our boy was feeling like a true Giga Chad, using the poor girl as an example to make sure no one else made the same mistake. He was holding back from saying that he would have to waste valuable substances that could revive another player, just to bring her back. Damn, now he was really laying it on thick, pointing out that she didn't realize her death was inconveniencing the other 29 players. He knew he was being harsh, but he had to make sure everyone understood the cost of dying. So once again, he made it clear this was a hardcore game for those who truly wanted to experience reality. If someone wasn't willing to accept those conditions, they should return the helmet. But the girl was now crying in desperation, saying that if her helmet was taken away, she would die in real life. Our boy also explained that she was probably losing friendship points with the NPCs, but apparently she was rich because she asked if they could release some friendship-boosting items like chocolates to give to him. The poor guy was about to check his keyboard across the room when he saw that she wanted to solve everything with money. But the girl kept insisting and insisting, saying that with a game like this, he could make a fortune. Of course, to him, money was useless. But Crowley kept saying he needed to take this seriously. She was completely shocked when he told her that accepting money to improve the game for people would basically be allowing cheating. Tired of dealing with this crazy girl, he checked the club. Good Time had also gotten information from the girl and made a post explaining how death worked and what it felt like. As always, people were complaining about not having a key to enter the game. Good Time then asked how the guy felt when he took off the helmet and left the game. The scavenger said he didn't feel any different. The only thing he hadn't gotten used to was the fact that in the game, he had an intense craving to eat raw meat and bite things. Good Time then asked about the encounter with the raiders. The lizard explained everything, including the part where he speared the NPCs. This made it clear to Chuguan that everyone saw the things they were killing as NPCs, which was why they didn't care. And based on the information Crowley had given about dying, he could also conclude that pain was significantly reduced. Basically, instead of frying their brains, the system simply disconnected them to prevent any lasting effects. Our boy was feeling jealous of these newcomers since, unlike them, he had to get used to everything bit by bit. Good Time then made a post outlining the chronological order of everything that had happened. He concluded that, at this rate, the game would focus on competition and resource exploration against the nearby tribes. Shubong thinks it's actually a good thing for players to believe in this idea since it basically makes them do what he needs. So of course he's going to copy this analysis. Sometime later, the poor guy fell asleep in his chair. As soon as he woke up, he had a message from the scavenger, wanting to log into the game immediately. Our guy told him to go to his real job, but the scavenger said he was certain this game would be a success, so if he planned to be one of the top players and get rich. Our boy tried to argue that it was dangerous and still in beta, but the guy replied that if a company rich enough to make a game like this wasn't worried, then neither was he. Unfortunately, Chu Guang couldn't really argue against that logic. Compared to any other game available, this one was light years ahead. Not to mention it was a game you could enjoy while sleeping, which essentially gave you 8 extra hours of playtime. But he explained to the scavenger that logging in now wouldn't be useful since there was nothing to do at night. Of course, Chu Guang had tried this before. At night, creatures were much stronger and far more numerous outside. But the lizard hit him with another solid argument. He was a mutant, so maybe logging in at night would make him stronger. Chu Guang realized it was getting difficult to argue with this guy, but it was undeniable that what he was saying made a little sense. Nighttime belonged to the mutants. Maybe for him, this time of day worked more as camouflage than as a danger. Unable to argue further, he eventually allowed the guy to log in. In an instant, the scavenger woke up in his capsule and Chu Guang was impressed by how fast it happened. He stepped out of the chamber, reeking, but our boy had a mission for him. Thinking he was dealing with an NPC, the scavenger just accepted it right away, telling him to give the order. Our boy then explained about the mutant tribe in the eastern region. His mission was to locate their bases and mark them on the map. If he encountered any survivors or mutants, he had to return to base immediately. The scavenger was excited about the mission, assuring him he could count on him. The next day, at 10 a.m., everyone woke up. Except for Crowley, her body was still in the process of regenerating. The scavenger, who had gone out at dawn, still hadn't returned. However, Chu Guang could see on the map that he was alive and not too far away. Shadow once again came to ask about the day's plans. Shadow approached and asked what they were going to do today. He dreamed of the day when Chu Guang would finally give the order to wipe out the nearby tribe. But our boy gave them the usual mission, gathering materials, collecting food, and improving defenses. They had built 1 wall, but they still needed 3 more to fully enclose the base. The biggest threat remained the mutant tribe on 76th Street. They had 30 members and only 3 guns. Not a great distribution. On top of that, he was sure that an ordinary human didn't stand a chance against those massive creatures, and the fate of some players could be worse than death. He knew that mental trauma would disconnect people from the helmet before anything truly horrible happened. But even then, he had no idea what would happen to the body. A little while later, outside the base, Wei wanted to know where the scavenger was. Our boy told him he had sent him on a special mission, making everyone jealous. Then he told Wei in good time that this time, they would be going on a journey with him. Wei accepted immediately, overjoyed. Too bad he'd have to betray his friend, who he had promised to help with the Steel Project. But going out to hunt monsters and gain experience with the boss was way more exciting. Not to mention, maybe it was time to unlock the mission to hunt them on Stringo. He said goodbye to Shadow, and in the next scene, they were already in the armory, grabbing weapons. Our boy tossed the guns to the two and pointed out that the safety switch was on the right side. They were heading to a nearby location to trade some resources. However, the two needed to obey every single command given to them. While they were there, they represented Camp 404. Good Time acknowledged this, and Wei was already pumped up to go. Our boy wondered how long these two were going to keep competing for his attention. But as the GM, this was perfect. It helped him keep the players under control. He then mentioned that the two seemed really excited, and their mission also included carrying some supplies. They loaded up plenty of meat, fish, and leather, all packed onto a cart. They weren't supposed to leave just yet. First, they had to prepare everything. It was funny how many players still thought this was just a simple mission and were already so eager. A little while later, they were leaving the base. What the gang needed most these days were tools, saws, hammers, screws, everything necessary for construction. Even though Mosquito's inventions were helpful, it was impossible to progress beyond a certain point without proper equipment. Even after all these years since the war, there was still a lot to be discovered, so trading was always an option. That's why the best finds were always at the survivor camps. There they could buy from people like Charlie, who sold to caravans. Of course, our boy had hidden any peculiar clothing, making sure everyone looked like regular adventurers. With that, they set off toward Brown Farms, carefully avoiding 76th Street. The reason for choosing that place was that fewer people knew about it, meaning he wouldn't have to explain why he brought these two. The problem was that avoiding 76th Street made the journey much longer, and the guys would end up exhausted. On top of that, they ran into some raiders along the way, forcing them to make a few stops. But finally, at 9 a.m., they arrived at their destination. Standing in front of the gate, they saw towering walls and a gallows at the entrance. Unlike Burt Street, where the power is split, Mr. Brown, who rules this place, is the true owner of everything. There are almost no free people living here. Either they work for the king, or they're slaves to the place. However, our boy isn't too worried since every city welcomes merchants because they usually bring profit. At least that's what he thought, until someone pointed a gun at him. He immediately raised his hands and asked them to wait. But from atop the wall, a man ordered him to explain himself and say who they were. Chu Guang explained that they weren't here with bad intentions. They had only come to trade and sell some goods. The red-haired man found it suspicious, saying he had never seen them before and asked where they were from. Our boy replied that they had been living in the wild and had recently migrated to this region. The man understood that they were nomads, and Chu Guang said that was pretty much the case. People who live like that aren't uncommon in this world. They usually travel from city to city, spending time in the wild in between. Since they don't farm, everything they eat comes from the creatures they hunt. At the same time, because they're always outside, they often have good items to sell. Of course, there are also nomads who kill, steal, and do other terrible things. Those are the ones known as raiders. The red-haired guy noticed that all three of them were armed and was starting to feel uneasy. He asked what they had brought to sell and why they had come here. Chu Guang mentioned the meat, fish, and leather, adding that he was interested in tools and some wheat. Once the trade was done, they would leave immediately. Although still suspicious, the red-haired man realized they genuinely seemed to want to trade. He told them to wait there while he asked the rest of his people. Meanwhile, Wei commented that this base really had a proper post-apocalyptic vibe. Good Time was impressed, saying this update was massive. The only problem was that they couldn't understand a word that guy had been saying. It was some strange language. Just then, the gates opened and a cart rolled out. Inside, it carried everything Chu Guang had requested. The man then approached and shook his hand, introducing himself as Liu Zhengyu. He wanted to know what kind of meat they had in their cart. Our boy explained that it was smoked fish and that Zhengyu was welcome to taste it if he wanted. The man opened the sack, took out a piece, cut it, and tossed it to a nearby slave to eat. With no choice, the slave ate it, noting that it had no salt but was definitely smoked. 10 minutes passed, and since he wasn't feeling anything strange, it seemed like the goods were fine. The apocalyptic trade began with Zhengyu trying to pay as little as possible. Chu Guang immediately cut in, raised the price significantly, and demanded 3 times more tools in return. He warned Zhengyu not to try cheating him. He had negotiated plenty of times on Burt Street, so he knew the real prices. Zhengyu fell silent, and Chu Guang wondered if he had gone too far with the price. But then the man simply agreed. This left Chu Guang stunned. This was the first time no one had tried to haggle in this world. Reality hit him. The guy on Burt Street had been ripping him off way more than he had realized. The two boys watching could tell the trade was over, but their leader didn't seem satisfied. But in the end, Chu Guang had no reason to complain. He had all the wheat he wanted and plenty of tools that would be a huge help in expanding the base. He shook hands with Zhengyu, who told him he was always welcome to trade there. Our boy forced a smile, saying it had truly been a great deal. Zhengyu then offered him some tobacco leaves. However, Chu Guang replied that he didn't have anything left to trade, so they were leaving. The truth was, he had wanted to buy some slaves, but there was nothing left. But Zhengyu, being generous, tossed the leaves into his hands and told him not to worry. It was a gift. Our boy accepted them, but of course he had no use for tobacco, so he planned to trade it for some tokens instead. A while later, as they were heading back, Wei asked if that was the famous Brown Farm. Good Time was excited, saying that it seemed like they had just unlocked the feature for trading with neutral factions. He was already imagining how realistic the game's economy would be, with supply and demand playing a big role. They could take something from one region and sell it in another where it was more valuable. Wei was eager to try it, saying it would be fun, but his friend reminded him that most of the content was probably still locked. Still, he was amazed at how much there was to do in this beta, even with this lazy NPC helping them. Wei reminded him that the NPC might actually be controlled by a person, so he should watch what he said. Good Time immediately realized his mistake and apologized to Guang, saying he would always live and die for him. With that, they continued their journey back to the base. But along the way, something was dripping next to them. It looked like blood. Guang heard a strange noise and immediately took cover. When he looked to the side, a six-limbed mutant was staring at them. It was a creeper, with a shoe in its mouth, meaning it had just eaten someone. The problem was, this thing wasn't supposed to appear during the day. Guang told them to get ready and took the first shot, but he missed. The monster locked eyes with them and let out a deep roar. The two guys flinched at first, but within a second, they were excited, saying they had just unlocked a new monster in the game. Guang tells them to stop having fun for a moment and focus on survival. They fire their shots as well, but the monster manages to dash into a building. Both boys reassure him, saying they will always protect his life. Guang then explains that unlike the Gnawers, creepers are a type of zombie that can think like a human. The good thing is that they fear sunlight, making it easy to escape from them during the day. But this one was walking in broad daylight with the sun hitting its body completely unbothered as it dodged bullets. Guang quickly realizes it got too close too fast and takes another shot, this time hitting its shoulder. Now the creature is standing there all twisted and trembling. Wei lets loose a barrage of bullets. The two rush forward, shooting like crazy, but the creature seems untouched. Then the monster suddenly advances, strangely ignoring Good Time completely. It heads straight for Guang, who now realizes he has to deal with it himself. The thing lunges for a bite, and Guang, in a split-second decision, tosses his gun aside, grabs a metal rod, and blocks the attack. He had a higher level than everyone else and 9 points in strength, almost double that of a normal person. But even then, the difference in power between them and that creature was immeasurable. The poor guy was thrown far back, slammed into a pillar, and man, things weren't looking good for him. Before he could react, the creature had already closed the distance and was now face to face with him. He tries to grab the metal rod again, but the monster lunges in for another bite. The ground cracks beneath him as he barely manages to block it. That's when he starts feeling a strange force surging from his chest. He wonders if this is the GM gene kicking in. He tries to push the creature away, but even with the gene activated, it's not enough. He's about to get grabbed. But just at that moment, 2 shots hit the creature from behind, one a direct hit. Wei shouts that his aim is bad, but come on man, you have to open your eyes when you shoot. At least the two of them got close enough that they couldn't possibly miss. And in that brief moment, Guang sees his chance. He yanks the metal rod and drives it deep into the monster. Finally, the damned creeper collapses, dead. He thanks the two, but he's shaking all over and barely able to stand. Good Time catches him and asks if there's anywhere nearby where they can rest. Wei points out that all the noise they made has definitely attracted more enemies. Guang says their only option is to find shelter. They move through the city, but the 3 of them are caught off guard. With heavy breathing and missing a foot, a red-haired girl, who, let's be honest, looks just like Liu Zhengyu's sister, appears before them. Red hair, glasses, it's uncanny. They approach her, and of course, she immediately reaches for her weapon. But Guang tells her to stay still. Her wound is too severe. Realizing she has no chance, she simply closes her eyes. Good Time asks if she's an enemy, but Guang has no idea. But to him, that doesn't matter. He tells them to pull up a chair, sits down in front of her, and says, "Now we can talk." The girl just wants to know what he wants. Our boy introduces himself and asks for her name. She replies, Xiedian. He asks about her identity, and she says she's a mercenary soldier from Stone City. Then he asks where her allies are. She replies that they're all dead. Guang doesn't seem surprised and just asks how many. She says they left the city with 4 people. 3 are already dead. Guang turns to Wei and tells him to search for the bodies and bring back their gear. With that, the blonde runs off while Xiayan wonders what language they're speaking and what was just said. Guang then asked about the creeper and why it was active. She explains that they were searching the city for base 117, but the creeper had been lurking there and jumped out at them. They tried to run but ended up underground. That's how her entire team got devoured. She then asked about this base 117. Shigean says she doesn't know exactly, but it's somewhere in this region. The item their contractor wants is inside it. Guang knows there must be valuable stuff there, but for now, it's not worth the risk. Still, it's useful information. He can frame it as a dungeon, pass the intel to the players, and let them figure it out later. She notices he's not reacting and asks if he isn't interested. He says there's no reason to be, so she reveals that inside there's a powerful mecha. Guang doesn't believe her and tells her to show him some pictures. If she's going to make a claim like that, she better have proof. And also, if he wants to know if her hair is dyed or natural. Out of nowhere, he throws that question at her. She says it's natural. Guang starts flirting with the lone survivor, telling her hair color is nice, but she really needs a bath. She looks confused, asking if he's messing with her. Then someone shouts, "Let her go." Everyone turns to see a guy pointing a gun at Wei. Good Time and Guang draw their weapons too, but the man warns them. No matter how strong Guang was, he wasn't faster than a bullet. Our boy actually takes that as a compliment. Meanwhile, Yan is happy to see that Chen Yang survived. He says he wouldn't go down that easily. He'll make sure she gets out of here safely. Then, out of nowhere, Wei starts yelling, telling them to just shoot already. He'll be back anyway. Besides, this guy stinks and he'd rather die than deal with that. Chen Yang, of course, has no idea what he just said and looks completely confused. He smacks Wei with the butt of his gun, telling him to stay still. But Wei keeps going, yelling at Guang to just shoot already. Either way, he'll be back soon. Guang, however, knows that even if he doesn't lose the player, he'll still have to waste resurrection items. So he tells the guy that he doesn't like threats. If he lowers his gun now, he'll still be spared. But Chen Yang insists, warning him that the blonde would be dead soon anyway. Guang simply starts counting down from 3, saying they could shoot together. Yan tells her friend that this is insane. He should just leave and abandon her here. Guang reaches 3. Chen Yang is scared, wondering if this lunatic really doesn't care about shooting his own ally. And that prisoner, why was he so eager to die? Something wasn't right. Guang reaches 2. Chen Yang finally speaks up, saying that Guang could keep the woman, but there was something he wanted. If they handed over the key she had, he would leave right now. Guang had no idea what he was talking about. Chen Yang clarified it was a magnetic card, and she knew exactly what he meant. Yan realized at that moment that her so-called ally was planning to betray her anyway. He said that rather than both of them dying here, at least he could complete the mission. The truth was, when one of their teammates died, he had played dead as well. He had planned to let the creeper finish everyone off and then loot the card from her body afterward. He told Guang to accept the deal. After all, she was a woman, so he was already getting something out of this. Guang remained silent and Yan said nothing either. Then suddenly, he put on a sinister grin and agreed. Chen Yang smiled, saying, well then, just tell her. Guang turned to Yan and ordered her to hand it over. Wei, meanwhile, was realizing that they were negotiating instead of shooting. All he wanted was to die in his leader's arms and farm a ton of affection points. He started yelling again, telling them to stop being stupid and just shoot already. Good Time told him to shut up. He was nervous about missing, and besides, Guang hadn't given the order. Yan looked at the card in her hand and remembered that it had been given to her by their former leader. In theory, Chen Yang shouldn't have known about it unless he had looted the leader's body. She clenched her teeth and then threw it at Chen Yang's feet, telling him to take it. He went to grab it with his foot, thanking her. But just as his hand reached for it, Wei suddenly vanished, collapsing to the ground. At that exact moment, Guang took the shot. A perfect hit. Chen Yang dropped to the ground dead. Good Time was excited, celebrating their first headshot, until Guang pointed out that he was the one who landed it. Good Time's accuracy bar was maxed out for nothing. Now they understood what he had done. The moment Chen Yang went for the card, Guang forcefully disconnected Wei from the game, causing his body to slump over. Yan sat there, pale, unable to believe that he had killed the guy without hesitation. But Guang simply said that Chen Yang had threatened Wei and had been given multiple chances. Just then, Wei, still shaking, opened his eyes and sat up, confused as to why he had been disconnected. He looked around, saw the guy was dead, and realized he had missed a cutscene. Good Time told him to contact his internet provider and get a more stable connection. Guang walked over to the body, picked up the card and the weapon. Then he told Yan that they were leaving, and from now on, she was on her own. She, however, clearly wanted to be taken along and asked if they were really going to abandon her here. Guang, already walking away, asked when he had ever said he would take her. The girl was confused. As a woman, she had been sure she would be kidnapped. It was a better fate than being abandoned without a leg. She then asked if they weren't a group of raiders. Guang ignored the question and instead asked if she was disappointed. She hesitated before saying she was just curious. Did they have a base nearby, and could she be taken there? One of the players was questioning whether she was some kind of NPC, trying to understand why Guang didn't want to take her. Wei thought they could save her, while Good Time figured it was too risky. She was a mercenary after all. On the other hand, that might actually be a good thing. She had experience with various weapons. She could be useful in production. Hearing this, Guang figured it made sense. He turned to Yan and told her that she should already know she would be nothing but a burden in her current state. Being left behind here would be a fate worse than death. But if she had a skill that could be of use, he might consider taking her along. Of course, she would have to be willing to work. Yan knew full well that she had no chance of making it back to the city on her own. Even if she did, even the simplest prosthetic would cost an absurd amount. Her only choices were to wake here and die or go with these guys, which meant she didn't really have a choice at all. Cut to the next scene. She was now sitting in their cart being transported. Gazing at the sky, she thought about how today was probably the last day she would know freedom in this world. She assumed that from now on, all she would be doing was having babies, since she doubted she had any other use. It was crazy how calmly she accepted it. This one was fully adapted to the apocalypse. Her only real fear was that she had heard giving birth was extremely painful, until Guang interrupted her train of thought. They had arrived. When she looked up, she saw a large number of people working enthusiastically, with several furnaces burning. She was confused by the sight of so many survivors in one place. She recalled seeing similar shelters open in other parts of the world years ago. There were many others still locked away for centuries, but what really puzzled her was why they were building walls. The entrance to this base was impenetrable. That thing even had gamma-ray lasers. Shiyan then asks if all these people belong to that shelter. Before answering, Wang comments that he thought she had already passed out. Somewhat embarrassed, she says she's not that weak. Chu Guang notices that she has a different constitution from normal people. Anyone else would have either fainted or developed a severe fever by now, but she was still holding on, just a little pale. He turns to the two players and tells them to deliver the wheat they bought to Burger P. They immediately agree, and Guang remembers that he had asked Burger P to build a storage house, which should be completed by now. Ever since that guy arrived, food management has been much easier. Then he goes to the cart, grabs a sack, lifts Xi Yan onto his shoulder and carries her off. The two players are left stunned by his sheer strength. Just then, Shadow appears, curious about what happened. White tells him to ask Good Time since he passed out right during the cutscene. Good Time explains everything, but unfortunately, he didn't understand much of the negotiation. On top of that, the girl who arrived was basically a new NPC. Shadow nods but asks why she was missing a leg. White tells him about what they encountered, a new monster from the latest update called a Creeper. As always, Shadow is more excited than scared, until Wei describes it, a terrifying 2.5-meter tall creature with 6 limbs. Not only that, but despite being shot multiple times, it moved extremely fast and dodged almost everything. They barely managed to take it down, and by sheer luck, Wang managed to land a metal rod into its back. Good Time then adds that they didn't just complete the Creeper quest. They also unlocked a new faction in the trading system. He says he's going to take a break, but Shadow reminds him that they still need help finishing the steel production furnace. Meanwhile, inside the base, all the other players are astonished by the arrival of the new NPC. They're wondering if the update they've all been waiting for is finally coming. Shiyan, on the other hand, has no idea how to react to being carried around in such an embarrassing manner. She doesn't understand what these guys are saying, but from their expressions and excitement, she knows all too well. At that moment, they looked worse than hyenas, and she had become a delicious lamb. She starts thinking that maybe she should just take her own life and die with some dignity, but she's so weak she can't even control her body properly. Meanwhile, Wang enters a room, tosses her onto a chair, and she protests, telling him to be more gentle. But he ignores her, orders her to stay put, and goes to a drawer, pulling out some medicine. She has no idea what he's about to do, but he tells her she's going to have to endure this. Obviously, it's that healing injector from before, the one that accelerates recovery. He spent 10 points on it, and now it's going to be put to use. Her wound was only getting worse, and at this rate, she might not survive. They didn't have a surgeon to properly treat it, so she would just keep bleeding until she died. That reminds him that he needs to ask Mosquito to make some alcohol to disinfect wounds. As he approaches, Xian is trembling with fear, begging him not to come any closer. But he doesn't hesitate and jabs the medicine into her thigh. She starts to scream but quickly realizes it doesn't actually hurt. In fact, she's not feeling anything at all. She asks what he did. He simply replies that he saved her life and that she doesn't need to thank him, which is a complete lie because he definitely expects her to thank him by working hard. But he soon notices that as soon as he injected her, she immediately fell asleep. He didn't expect this stuff to make someone that drowsy. Good thing he didn't use it during a fight. He makes a note to ensure he doesn't make this mistake again. For now, he lets her rest in the area reserved for players who haven't arrived yet. The temperature and air quality are more stable there, so she should recover more easily. With that, her situation is settled, and he leaves the room. Time to check stats. After all that fighting, he wonders if his stats have improved. Opening the system, he sees that after all the chaos, he's leveled up twice. His strength has increased from 9 to 10, and his constitution from 7 to 8. Unlike players like Wei, who always gain perception points, Wang's stats seem to increase randomly. At least with 10 strength, he is now twice as powerful as a normal human. And with higher constitution, he's starting to build resistance against poisons. But then he notices something else, a special talent. In extreme danger, his stats temporarily increase by up to 15%. However, his fatigue builds up faster. He likes the effect, but the name Wild Instinct feels a bit cringe. He recalls that surge of energy in his chest, so that must have been what saved him. Additionally, looking at the Creeper's information, he can't even see its stats. If it weren't for his talent, the others shooting from behind, and that metal rod, they probably wouldn't have won. Checking the loot, he takes a look at the bag filled with items they looted. This time, they brought an entire arsenal. Shotguns, ammunition, and more. Finally, they had not only enough to defend themselves, but also to attack. However, he notices that most of the cartridges are basic, just plain metal rounds. Then he spots some bullets with red tips. Those must have some kind of special effect. Even though mercenaries weren't rich, they always had impressive firepower. Stone City was truly not a place to be underestimated. But their base was also starting to get pretty good. After winter, he would organize a caravan to pass through there and set up new trade opportunities. After all, he couldn't rely on those damn merchants who were always trying to take advantage of him. Sometime later, a different dish had been prepared, savory yam with a bit of meat. Everyone was excited that fish had finally started to spawn in the river. Burger P was proud of the flavor, saying it tasted somewhat like fast food mashed potatoes. The only downside was that he had to use a bit of the soy sauce that Guang had given him. Even though he used it sparingly, a good portion was already gone just for this small meal. But then, oh god, Wisteria appeared with a pitiful look, begging for a little more. However, in the apocalypse, that wasn't an option, 1 plate per person. She made a fuss, acting all cute, asking if she could at least have it again tomorrow. But he said no, the soy sauce was rare. If she wanted something like that when she woke up, she should order it on a food. Burger P then realized that this was the first time in his life he had to ration even salt. He really was becoming a broke chef. Meanwhile, Wei was telling stories about his adventure and how he was a hero shooting at the monster. Of course, Good Time immediately countered, saying that anyone listening to that story would think Wei actually hit something. But the newbie players were all hyped, eager to hear more details. With that, Good Time just left. As night fell, Guang was taking Seb to recharge. The only strange thing so far was that the scavenger hadn't returned in a long time. However, he had seen and he logged out 2 hours ago, so at least he was alive. He was probably sleeping out in the wilderness, which was risky. Guang had no idea if he could get eaten, or what would happen if he did. But there was nothing he could do about that. He sat at his PC. It was time to check the day's achievements. The construction of the eastern wall had been completed. On top of that, with all the players working, they were stockpiling a ton of materials. Of course, they were also burning through a lot of wood and cement for all these constructions. Seeing the rate at which they were using wood, he knew he would have to assign at least 5 more people to logging. The good news was that after the trade deal, they now had plenty of food, including wheat. The bad news was that they had to sell a lot of their own food to get that wheat. He also saw that they had used up 5 pieces of leather. It looked like Wisteria was finally learning how to make clothes faster. Now that they had a ton of weapons, he knew it was time to start thinking about building an armory. Even with all this, he had only earned 7 points, but he decided to open them. Then suddenly, Seb came running in shouting for him. A robot looked angry, demanding to know why Guang had brought a stranger back. Guang was confused, asking what he was talking about, but Seb insisted that he had seen it clearly. Guang had carried that girl on his shoulder. Guang asked what the problem was, and Seb reminded him. He had no way of controlling the natives, so even if they refused to work or do anything, he had no means of forcing them. But Guang just laughed, saying that Seb was being dumb if he thought he trusted either the players or the natives. Seb felt relieved, at least Guang hadn't said he didn't trust him. But Guang simply turned away, not too concerned. It was time for one of his favorite activities, checking the player registration list. The count had reached 275. Now, instead of just passing on information, he also had to leave some questions. With so many people signing up, he needed a better way to filter them. He wasn't interested in girls trying to join just to ask for gifts. He wanted the tryhards who were ready to dedicate their lives to the game. At this point, the game's website was getting over 1,000 visits per day. The only issue was that it wasn't officially certified yet, so people kept getting virus warnings. But even so, at the pace things were moving, soon he would be able to sit back while making the fools work. He checked the forums and saw that the scavenger had posted, saying he was having a great time and had even found a tire factory up north. Just as Guang had suspected, not only had he not died, but he had logged out while still in the forest. Everyone was curious about the lizard's stories, and as always, Good Time had made a post. He detailed everything, the creeper attack, the negotiations in the city, and how Guang had killed the monster from behind. Of course, he also mentioned the beautiful new NPC he was eager to get to know better. Guang clicked the quality post button, approving it. At that moment, Sev approached him. He informed Guang that the woman he had brought back was awake. Poor Xie-Yan, who had been left on the cold floor, was finally opening her eyes, asking for water. But when she looked up, she saw Guang standing in front of her with a Kit Kat and a bottle of water. She immediately grabbed them, drinking all the water in one go. But she wasn't sure what the other thing was. For someone born in the apocalypse, would she even know what a chocolate bar was? The problem was that, despite her hesitation, her stomach was growling loudly. With no other choice, she opened the package and immediately started drooling. She figured that if this guy had saved her, he probably wasn't trying to poison her. She took a bite and instantly fell in love, saying it was absolutely delicious. As she basked in the moment, Guang suddenly stepped closer, looked her straight in the eyes, and asked, "So is it good?" She blushed deeply and said yes. That was exactly what Guang wanted to hear, so he asked if she might like some more. Of course, she wasn't dumb. She immediately said yes. He then explained that what she had eaten was called chocolate, and she could get more if she obeyed everything he told her to do. Not only would he give her food and chocolate, but also a safe place to live. He wanted to know if she would leave or stay, and after hesitating for a second, she obviously said she would work for him. Even so, she felt sad because she knew this was her only option. If she tried to return to the city she came from, she would collapse halfway and rot on the ground. As humiliating as it was, she wanted to survive. She wasn't ready to choose death. All she asked of Guang was that he be gentle with her because it was her first time. Our boy's face changed color, confused and completely lost. He told her to explain what she was thinking because everything he was discussing had nothing to do with that kind of work. She made a strange face, blushing even more, wondering if she had misunderstood everything from the beginning. Wasn't he talking about making babies? She had a mental breakdown, falling backward with her soul leaving her body, begging to be killed out of sheer embarrassment. A little while later, he was explaining that his plan was to create a perfect survivor camp and wipe out all the nearby mutants. But she warned him that restoring order wasn't as simple as just building walls. If he had ever been to Rock Town, he would know that there were countless people there far stronger than anyone here. Guang simply replied that he had a plan in progress, while thinking to himself that this girl was annoying, constantly rejecting his ideas. He then explained that even if it took creating multiple generations of people, he would achieve his goal. Hearing that, she was once again convinced it involved making babies. He had literally said multiple generations. He quickly changed the subject and asked if she knew how to maintain weapons, repair them, and similar tasks. She replied that she did. Those were basic survival skills in this world. Guang then told her that from now on, she would be in charge of the armory. She was still confused about why he had even brought her here. He explained that she would stay at the camp, taking care of the weapons and performing maintenance. Simple as that. She understood she would be selling them, but she didn't know to whom. He explained that it was obvious to the residents of this place. Confused, she pointed out that these people seemed like his subordinates, so why was he selling them weapons? Our boy said that it was something like that, but the relationship between them was different. Many new people were arriving, and on top of that, he wanted to establish a self-sustaining economy in the camp. Survivors could work to earn points, and those points could be exchanged for food, medical supplies, and weapons. If she was from Rock Town, she should be familiar with the token system. It was basically the same thing. Strangely, she didn't seem to understand any of it, and Guang was already tired of trying to explain. That's when he remembered that intelligent people like old Charlie were rare. Most people in this world didn't study. Everyone was just trying to survive. Considering that Xi Yan risked her life for money, she clearly wasn't the brightest. But Guang didn't care. All he needed was another person to follow orders. He told her not to worry. He would teach her some basic words so she could communicate with the people here. She was still hesitant, but he reminded her that she had no choice. She had to do as he said. And honestly, it was better if she didn't learn too much, or she might start negotiating. He would teach her how to say contribution points, numbers, and the names of weapons. Nothing more. He handed her a sheet of paper, telling her that everything she needed to memorize was written there. The first sentence was an introduction, stating her name and asking how she could help. She kept reading, making a weird face, clearly not understanding a damn thing. But when she looked up at Guang, she saw that he was completely serious. He stared at her and asked if she had already memorized everything. Of course, she answered no. Without hesitation, he scolded her, telling her to hurry up and start memorizing. She wasn't here for free. She started thinking that maybe the baby-making job would have been easier. Not to mention, she didn't understand why Guang had absolutely no interest in her. She remembered that her former boss used to give flowers and flirt constantly. Life as a street fighter was extremely dangerous. She risked her life every day. The biggest dream of someone from Stone City was to marry a rich person and survive comfortably. She always thought that one day she would be assigned to protect some rich magnate, save him, and everything would work out. But looking at her legs, seeing that she was crippled, she knew that was no longer possible. No one would want to marry a girl with only one leg. Guang snapped her out of her thoughts, telling her to focus and keep studying. He stood up, realizing it wouldn't be easy to teach her. Then he walked away, telling her he would come back later to test what she had learned. And if she hadn't improved her conversation skills, maybe she would end up working as a farming slave in Bert's lands. At least that way, he would make some money. Guang is ruthless, but in reality, it's just his way of making sure she studies. Otherwise, she'd just get lazy. Obviously, he wasn't actually going to sell her as a slave if she didn't learn. At most, he'd just kick her out of the base. The next morning, Good Time came to ask about her. Guang told him that her injuries were serious and that she would need to rest for a few days. But he had already spoken to her, and now she was part of the base. Within a few days, she would be in charge of the weapons. In the end, she studied until 3 a.m., and he had to pick her up off the floor. Good Time, who loved making forum posts, already knew the new NPC's name and role. Then Wei appeared, asking if today they were going on an epic hunt. Guang started wondering when exactly he became the one taking missions from these guys. A while later, he was handing a small gun to Wei, telling him they'd be using this today. But Wei was greedy. He wanted a shotgun instead of a pistol. Guang simply pushed him forward, telling him they were going hunting, not fighting mutants. It was better for him to get familiar with these two weapons before asking for anything else. Meanwhile, Shadow and Good Time were still struggling to get the metal furnace working. They were trying to get the temperature high enough to start melting metal. And after all these days of work, they finally succeeded. The boys were tearing up with joy, and Shadow knew that now they could produce high-quality weapons. But Good Time thought for a moment and said maybe they should make a cooking pot first, just to improve their meals a bit. Burger P had warned that the soy sauce was running out, so soon they'd be back to the same old thing. Fish stew with big-headed fish every single day. Shadow agreed that maybe making a pot was the better choice. Meanwhile, Mosquito had been working for days and finally completed something. A pressurized manual flamethrower. Man, how did he even make this? This guy started as a carpenter, but was now outbuilding everyone. He named it Hellfire 0.1, and right at that moment, Feng showed up. At first, he thought it was about the traps, but Guan told him he had found something much more interesting. He tossed a bucket onto the ground, and when Mosquito looked inside, he saw something called struvite. Wong had no idea what that was, but Mosquito got extremely excited and bolted into the forest, running full speed to find more. Feng explained that he had also found phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium, and other similar things. They ran through the forest, reaching the lake, where Mosquito dipped his hand in and tasted it. Immediately, he almost threw up. He said the stuff was incredibly fresh. Congratulations to him, he had just tasted bird poop. But he knew there was some chemical process involved with various H6, NH, and suddenly, it turned into struvite. Struvite, when mixed with soil and left over time, creates nitrate soil. If you take that soil, do some more chemistry magic, and process it, you can turn struvite into gunpowder. With this, they could make black powder, the deadliest kind. Feng said he understood, but as far as he knew, they also needed sulfur to make it. Apparently, poor Mosquito wasn't quite as good at chemistry as he thought. He had completely forgotten about that detail. Feng suggested they look around to see if they could find anything useful. But after an hour of searching in the forest, they still hadn't found any sulfur. They walked even further until they finally found a gypsum mine. Feng explained the whole chemical process necessary to extract calcium sulfate, which was what they needed. Apparently, they had already known this but had just forgotten, because Shadow had used sulfur to make cement. Feng said they were getting exhausted and forgetting things, but it was fine. Now they just had to haul everything back to the base. However, when they returned carrying chests of supplies, they found a crowd gathered around someone. Guan wondered what was going on. There was a guy with a two-headed cow trying to talk to everyone, but obviously he was speaking in a language no one understood. Even so, the players were excited, saying it was a new NPC. Feng, on the other hand, thought it was best to inform Guan. He was the only one who could talk to these people. He asked Burger P how this happened. Burger P explained that some guys had been carrying a cement block, and when this stranger saw them, he started following them all the way here. Meanwhile, the players were more fascinated by the two-headed cow than anything else. The players weren't sure if they should lock this guy up and wait for the NPC to arrive or try to force some kind of quest from him. The Wanderer, however, had no idea what these guys were saying, but he knew it wasn't anything good. He had a revolver, but it only had 6 bullets. After those were gone, he was definitely going to get beaten to death with shovels. He shouted again, trying to explain that he was just a merchant wanting to trade. There was Mimi to be hostile. He tried to tell them that all he wanted was to sell some goods in exchange for a place to stay. But of course, no one understood a word. That's when he realized how stupid it was to have followed these guys. Until someone spoke up. What's going on here? The merchant was shocked. He could finally understand someone. It was Guang carrying a deer under one arm. This immediately made the merchant nervous. He could tell that this guy was way stronger than he had expected. Guang casually tossed the deer to the ground and ordered everyone to get back to work. The crowd dispersed as he stepped up to the merchant and asked, "Who are you?" The guy excitedly responds that he finally found someone he can talk to. But Guang isn't in the mood for games and tells him to answer properly. The man introduces himself as Sun Shiki, a neighbor from Red River City. Guang, however, has no idea where that city even is. He asks what the guy is doing there, and Sun obviously replies that he's looking for business. Guang says he already figured that much. What he really wants to know is why Sun followed his people. The merchant tries to explain that it was all just a misunderstanding. When he saw the group and noticed that everyone was wearing the same outfit, he assumed there had to be a settlement nearby where he could trade. He insists he's just a simple merchant with no intention of offending anyone. But the truth is, he tried to sell a single bullet for 5,000 tokens. That's because he had heard rumors about people wearing this blue uniform. Apparently, everyone said they were dumb and easy to scam. It seemed like there had been other bases like Guang's before, but none of them had survived. The merchant then explains that as the group started surrounding him, he just ended up following them without being able to get away. Guang says he understands, but surely Sun must know that following someone back to their base isn't exactly a friendly gesture in this world. The merchant apologizes again, admitting that Guang is right. Guang then asks if he's willing to properly apologize. The guy, eager to make peace, immediately says yes. Obviously, that's exactly what Guang wanted to hear. Time to start extorting the poor guy. The moment he asks how Sun plans to pay for his apology, the merchant hesitates. Guang simply states the obvious: an apology can't come empty-handed. The merchant's expression changes, but he quickly says that Guang can choose something from his wares. Guang thanks him and, a little while later, is browsing through everything the two-headed cow is carrying. Surprisingly, the guy actually had some really good stuff. There were even long-range revolvers, which were perfect since they were way more precise. Then something catches his eye. He opens a bag and sees a bunch of coins with the number 1 on them. Looking closer, he realizes that they aren't real coins. They're casino tokens. Wang asks what's up with that. Sun explains that he found them in an old arcade and figured the metal might be useful. Wang asks if there are more. The merchant says yes, about 4 or 5 more bags full. Wang immediately says he wants all of them as his payment, and next time Sun visits, he should bring the rest, and they'll trade for meat. Wang is thinking that for now, he'll ask for small things, just enough to keep the merchant coming back for more deals. He also doesn't want Sun to know that they're short on weapons. That would be risky. Sun Shiki agrees to the deal and says that if that's the agreement, he's more than happy to trade. For him, it's not super profitable, but the important thing is securing another base to sell his goods to. Guang then starts offering a certain amount of food in exchange for weapons. Sun instantly accepts and even throws in some extra ammo. Later on, the merchant explains the situation in Red River City. Back when the war started, the place was home to several nuclear plants. The explosions left the entire region desolate. That's why the ecosystem is extremely weak. There's barely anything to plant or eat. On the other hand, the destruction was so massive that there's tons of salvageable junk lying around. It's almost like an entire century of human history is buried beneath the ruins. Wong asks how they even get food. Surely they can't import everything. Sun explains that apparently they eat rats and cockroaches. Guang is stunned, but Sun just shrugs. If it has protein, it's edible. Insects are also used to make protein bars or nutritional paste. He points to a jar and says it contains one of the city's specialties. Wong asks if it's some kind of jelly, but Sun reveals that it's actually mutant cockroaches. The moment Sun says that, Guang doesn't even want to know how it was made. But the merchant eagerly explains the entire process of boiling, soaking, and mashing them to extract protein. He even asks if Guang wants to try it. Guang immediately refuses. Sun insists that it's common over there, they deal with insects every day. Hearing that, Guang asks if they have any methods for dealing with leeches. The merchant looks surprised and explains that they barely have leeches in their city because of the ants. Guang is intrigued and Sun clarifies that they aren't normal ants, they're mutant steel ants. Basically, they grow to the size of a human hand and there are huge numbers of them. They're resistant to poison, can't be smashed with a hammer, and easily wipe out leeches. Guang looks interested and asks him to bring some next time. A while later, Sun leaves and Guang is back at the base, saying he's got some great ideas. It looks like he's going to use those casino tokens as the settlement's currency. From what Sun said, there are about 70,000 of them out there. For Guang, that's more than enough to set up a working system. On top of that, he can sink the currency into older players by having them buy ranks and privileges. Once the economy stabilizes, everyone will be hunting and working non-stop to earn more. That way, without lifting a finger, he'll have complete control over everyone. And the players who've been around since the beginning will be motivated to keep the system running so they don't lose their edge. In the end, having a form of currency was essential. Just like every civilization, need to know likes on this video that helps Mamoru make more juicy content for his viewers. Activate the cheeky little bell, and I'm out.